The wind was already turning colder as the long days of harvest waned, sweeping through Winterfell's ancient courtyards and rattling the drying red leaves of the lone wood above the God's Wood pool. Arya Stark stood at the third battlement of the eastern wall and breathed the chill deep into her lungs until the taste of ironstone and wood smoke filled her mouth. Down below, servants scurried across the yard with baskets of turnips and sacks of grain, their chatter muffled by distance. Somewhere, a hammer rang on anvil, and each strike echoed in her ribs like the beat of a pledge. She meant never to leave this place again, not while the North still needed swords and eyes that were quick and true. For moons, she had watched her kin ride south with banners snapping gold and crimson beside stark white. And she had felt the hollow yank in her chest each time another wagon trundled out the gates toward King's Landing. Sansa had gone with father. Mother had gone after Bran's fall. Robb spent more nights in the Great Hall poring over letters than laughing in the training yard. Yet Arya remained, a shadow among broken routines, her feet too restless for the solar, her tongue too sharp for the lady lessons Septim ordained, still pressed upon her like a dull blade forced into a sheath. Only one voice answered her unspent hunger. Sir Roderick's gruff invitation to the yard at dawn. That morning, as gray light edged over the peaks of the broken towers, Arya had slipped from her chamber, wrapped in an old wool cloak that smelled no longer of lavender sachets, but of oiled leather. Needle, her slender Bravosi sword half her own height, waited beneath the cloak, a cool promise against her spine. She did not yet stride like a knight, yet nor did she creep like a child. Her mind replayed the first lesson northern-born: never betray your footing to the frost. Let your boots kiss the stones so softly the earth might doubt you had passed. Within the yard, Sir Roderick Castle turned at the scrape of the gate. His white-streaked whiskers bristled with condensation, and breath plumed from his nostrils as from an old patient bull. He lifted a mailed hand in greeting but wasted no words on courtesy. Words were for later, for the feasting table or the rookery. This hour belonged to sweat and bruises. Needle's point circled through the dawn haze, tracing invisible sigils of determination. Arya's stance had grown surer. Her knees bent like a courser gathering speed. Her shoulders square but relaxed. Roderick countered with a blunted longsword twice Needle's width, yet he handled it as lightly as a birch branch, twisting his hips, letting weight and angle do the labor. Arya darted low. Her blade flicked beneath his guard, but leather met iron. The clang jolted up her wrist, and she hissed. A sound, Roderick always said, better saved for when one celebrated a true bite. She retreated, feet skating over last night's thin glaze of rime. The stable boys paused, pitchforks mid-air, watching the dance of a wolf girl and a whiskered master. They circled. 2 more feints left, one right. Roderick's sword hollered through the air, and Arya felt the gust brush her cheek where plates once hung. She answered with 2 quick thrusts, turning her hips all the while, never offering a still target. When at last her point threaded the gap between his vambrace and gorget, she did not lunge with triumph. She withdrew clean, respecting the lesson. A northern warrior survives by patience more than boast. Roderick lowered his blade. Faster each dawn, he murmured. But a cold blade alone won't win the Norse wars. You must learn to command the yard itself. He gestured to the walls, the towers, the steaming forges. Every shadow is an ally or an enemy. Listen with more than ears. Feel the ground. Smell the stables. Count the steps of those behind you without turning. His voice lowered. Someday soon, lass, this castle may be the last line between hearth and ruin. Arya wiped a bead of sweat from her brow. I would guard it better than any wall of stone, sir. His eyes met hers, one steel, one softer. A sentry sees, but a general sees beyond. He nodded toward the parapet she had just left. Walk it again after the meal. Map every blind corner. Decide where you'd place archers if riders broke the gate. Damn. Her heart thumped, half thrill, half dread. A general. She liked the taste of that word. Salt and marrow, nothing sugared. But its heft was more than one blade's reach. She sheathed needle and offered Roderick a solemn dip of head. I will. Winterfell's midday rang busy as a beehive in high summer, though the sun hovered weak behind mare's tail clouds. In the library tower, Arya borrowed Maester Luwin's compasses and yellowed ledgers, copying crude diagrams into an old ledger of her own. Measurements of wall spans, distances between towers, thickness of gates. She marked where the hot springs flowed beneath certain chambers. How the hidden warmth might hinder or help a siege. When the maester drifted past, he mumbled approval at her tidy numerals. She never told him the numbers were not mere curiosity, but soldiers in her private campaign. Afternoons, when Bran's wicker seat rolled across the yard beneath old Nan's watchful eye, Arya halted her pacing to kneel by him. Bran's blue eyes shone with unspent motion, yet they fixed on the ramparts with the same hunger that gripped her. She traced the drawbridge chain with her finger in the dust, and described how she might station shield-bearers there, how scalding water from the smithy's vats could pour through murder holes onto invaders. Bran listened, lips parted, as though her words spun a tapestry of galloping feet he could almost chase. His thanks came quiet but warm, and each time Arya rose, she felt the siblings' bond weave tighter, forming an invisible banner neither distance nor war could shred. Evenings carried her into the woods beyond the broken tower. There, beneath the black branches, she practiced silent running, heartbeats aligned with pine needle damp. She pictured each trunk as a pillar of an unseen war room, plotting flanking routes that braided through the forest like hidden rivers. The direwolf pups, grown lanky now, sometimes trailed her, padded ghosts that kept watch with easy trust. Nymeria, towering and gray, often brushed against her knee, reminding her of a wild power, not quite hers yet not wholly separate. On one such dusk, as stick crack and owl hoot blended into steady heartbeat, Arya sensed a second presence. A hand tugged her cloak. She pivoted, needle bright in moonless gloom, until the blade hissed at Roderick's throat. But he stood easy, holding a torch pinched low so its glare did not blind. "Good," he whispered. "Even the wind should fear waking you." He moved aside to reveal a squat figure in rough spun, hood thrown back to show a scar that slashed brow to cheek. Kalor Stone, a bastard from the mountain clans, lately sworn to Winterfell for shelter and work. He carried a pair of carved wooden swords half again as long as needle. Sir Roderick explained before she asked. "Steel teaches weight and edge. Wood teaches trust. You will lead men of every ilk, Arya. Spar with those who were not raised behind Castle Stone." Kalor's dark eyes flicked to her face, unreadable as river stones. They squared off, torchlight bobbing in the mossy hollow. His style, she soon learned, was like the mountain goat. Short bursts, sudden lunges, horns rather than finesse. Arya adapted, letting needles reach dance around his heavier swings. Wood thumped wood in a rhythm wholly foreign to the polished clang of the yard. And yet, when Kalor's final shove sent her sliding across mold-slick roots, she rose grinning. New bruises meant new ways to breathe. Thus the knights formed their own discipline. Spar at first torch, map by second, join the watch on the walls until the last ember of the hearth died. Word of Arya's routine trickled through the keep, carried on stable gossip and kitchen scuttle. Some grumbled that a wolf maid should not sweat like a groom, others watched her stride with tight-mouthed pride. She learned which voices belonged to honest caution and which to fear-mongering. She recorded them silently, the way a crow counts wheat seeds in spring. When snow finally dusted the first row of rampart stones, Robb summoned her to the great hall. Fire crackled behind the dais, painting his face in copper-green shadows. He looked older than she remembered, the skin drawn taut by maps and messages from Southron lords. Two gray-furred direwolves dozed near his feet, sentinel shapes that roused only when servants stirred the coals. "Sister," Robb said, soft enough to invite confidence, but stern enough to deny evasion. "Rumor says you study the walls as a sellsword studies coin. Why?" Arya clasped her hands to hide blackened nails. "Because Winterfell is mine to know, and if trouble comes sooner than letters can ride, we must be ready." He watched the flames. "Some fear you court danger by brandishing needle in plain sight. Lady seeing servants stumble in fright." She stepped closer. "Better they fear preparedness than dread surprise." Robb's lips twitched, The ghost of boyish mischief returned. Mother would thrash me with her eyes for encouraging you, then blame father's blood, not yours. At that, he laughed outright. Very well. Draft me a patrol schedule by week's end. The watch grows thin. I lost 3 guards riding escort to White Harbor. Teach me where to place them. So she did. With Bran's careful penmanship guiding the curves, Arya drew up routes that overlapped at choke points, leaving no arch blind past the second bell of night. She paired seasoned spearmen with quick-footed squires, rotated their posts so each knew the yard as their own bedchamber. Robb approved it without a quibble. Guards soon carried copies folded in oiled cloth, and Arya overheard them remark, half amused, half awed, that the littlest wolf had eyes like a hawk perched atop every gate. As winter bit harder, supplies trickled slower from White Harbor. Sail was treacherous beyond the bite, and carts slogged through snowdrifts that swallowed horses to the hocks. Arya switched her patrols to double as warehouse tallies. She inventoried salt pork, cheese wheels, oats, and black beans, comparing them to pages father had left locked in his solar desk. Discrepancies, even small ones, she flagged for Maester Lewin. Once, she found 2 kegs of lamp oil vanished from the stores. She tracked them to a crooked groom who sold them off for silver bits to a passing peddler. The groom lost 3 fingers. The peddler hung by dawn. Winterfell's corridors whispered that the wolf-maid sniffed out theft as keen as any hound. Yet not all bread was born of discipline. Some nights, Arya and Bran convened in the kitchens after the castle slept. Cook Sarah would slide them honey cakes, still steaming from the oven, claiming it was waste to leave such sweetness untasted by Stark lips. By candlelight, they shared plans impossible to any other pair. Bran dreaming of wheels shod with iron that might let him race the yard. Arya visioning signal fires across the King's Road hills, so swift riders might know Winterfell's will within a day. They bartered these dreams like children, trading treasures. In those small hours, she felt her purpose knit tight with her brother's. She would carve pathways, and he would ride them, one mind steering 2 reflecting souls. Spring teased them, then fled. Ravens brought word of King Robert's death, then of Ned Stark's arrest. Catelyn's letters arrived wrinkled and wet from snowmelt, telling of Tyrion Lannister's capture, of tension snapping across the riverlands like frozen branches in a storm. Robb's jaw hardened. Grey Wind's hackles bristled at each meeting in the Great Hall. Voices of bannermen carried through the corridors, low and dangerous. The North would not sit idle while her blood was held in chains. Arya overheard veterans debating how many men could be spared southward without gutting Winterfell's garrison. She watched Robb pace, maps scattered like fallen leaves. She studied those maps too in secret moments. A general, Sir Roderick had said. A general sees beyond. The night Robb called banners, Arya climbed the forest tower and looked east where dawn would break. Stars quivered atop black trees. Across that void lay Moat Cailin, the Neck, the Twins, the whispering heart of war. She understood she could not ride out with the vanguard. The council would never allow a girl of 10 and 4 to march. But she could carve Winterfell into a fortress so fierce no crow would dare roost on her ramparts. Roderick remained to command, but he summoned Arya to his side in the courtyard as trumpet calls split the air, and men buckled steel to leather. He pressed into her palm a ring rod of cold iron, the sigil of House Castle etched crude upon its face. "You have eyes and marrow fit for command," he said. "If the walls cry out, speak with my voice." She bowed lower than she ever had, the ring's weight suddenly heavier than needle. "I swear it." 3 days later, Robb rode out, Grey Wind trotting huge at his stirrup. Bran waved from atop the battlements, cheeks blotched red in the wind. Arya stood near him, silent save for measured breaths. Snow spiraled lazily behind the vanishing host, like white ash after pyres. Winterfell felt at once vaster and thinner without the roar of soldiers' boots. Arya wasted no hour. She convened with Cara, captain of the Watchers, and redrew the roster into tighter circles. She conscripted smiths to refit the scorpions long rusting above the gatehouse. She directed orphans to carry pebble lime and sandbags to parapets, where sling throwers might need fast ammunition. She coaxed old Nan to recall timber tunnels beneath the granary, then sent coal miners to seal or trap them. She walked every foot of the outer walls at least twice each day, memorizing each arrow slit. Once she knelt, gloved hand pressed to stone, and thought she could feel Winterfell itself, a slumbering giant stirring to her whisper. Still, threats crept close. A fortnight past Robb's departure, riders in cracked leather approached the outer palisade, bearing no banners. Arya watched from the top of the inner gatehouse. She counted 41 men, maybe more, daggers gleaming, axes nicked black. She saw hunger in their shoulders, and hunger was deadlier than hate. Roderick joined her, his beard stiff with hoarfrost. Clans of the east flanks, mayhap. But they sniff weakness. Issim to die. Arya's answer came quick. Let us show them none. She ordered horn blasts of warning, 3 short, 1 long. Archers arrayed along the walkway, arrows nocked but not drawn, steel glinted, not brandished. The strangers halted at just within bowshot. Their leader shouted. Arya could not parse the words across the snow swirl, but the tone carried insolence. She raised a hand, and 2 trumpets sounded a single sharp note. The portcullis creaked upward a foot, just enough for a lone figure to step out. Calor Stone, carrying a bare spear twice his height, tip winking silver. He strode to the halfway mark between wall and riders. He said nothing. He merely planted the spear butt in the ground and folded arms, chin lifted as though boredom plagued him more than risk. The riders grew uneasy. Arya counted breaths. The 7th breath later, the leader spat in the snow and wheeled away. The rest followed, turning like a flock that found the sky empty of prey. When they vanished beyond the ridgeline, Calor returned, undisturbed, and the portcullis clanged shut. That eve Arya and Roderick shared mulled cider near the hearth. He studied her over the brim. You gambled that hunger yields to fear when faced by a lone sentinel. I gambled on the North's legend, she replied. We are wolves. They must see teeth even when we stand alone. Roderick lifted his mug. Then may your teeth ever gleam. Weeks bled into months. Snow grew thick enough to swallow thigh-high along the outer bailey. Under candle glow, Arya convened small councils, storekeepers, washerwomen, tanners, listening more than speaking, coaxing solutions rather than dictating. She learned to read the twitch of a brow, the hitch of breath before dissent. Command, she realized, was less about issuing orders than navigating tides of worry and loyalty. Under her quiet influence, Winterfell's pulse steadied. Candle quotas kept halls warm, but not wasteful. Rotating hearth duty gave every family a stake in the great fires. She authorized festivals of story and song twice a moon, where mead flowed sparingly but laughter abundant. Old Nan's tales of the long night reminded all what unity could conquer. Children perched near Arya as she carved toy blades from pine, whispering that they too would defend the walls one day. She saw her younger self in their shining eyes and felt an unfamiliar peace. Perhaps this too was part of generalship, the tending of spirits so they would not fracture. Yet calm cannot linger where war brews. Word arrived of Ned Stark's execution in King's Landing. Ravens beat against the rookery slits, like hearts flung hard against ribs. Bran fell into stony silence. Rickon howled, rage without reason. Winterfell's corridors wore mourning black. Some folk muttered of vengeance, some of despair. The men looked to Roderick. Roderick looked, quietly, to Arya. She proposed a tribute feast, not of wine and roast, but of vigil. Every household, high and low, gathered by torch-clad processional in the godswood. Snowflakes drifted among the torches like sparks from heaven. Bran, positioned at the foot of the weirwood, recited the ancient house Stark words. Then each person stepped forward to lay a token: steel link, harvest loaf, child's wooden horse, at the tree's roots. Arya placed needle upon the pile, acknowledging aloud that her father's blood sharpened that steel, and thus the blade belonged first to him, then to all who carried his legacy. When dawn broke, the tokens had frozen into the pooled spring water, forming a crystalline mound beneath the heart tree's face. Light refracted across the yard, casting pale red bars like protective ribs. Folk who passed beneath them later that day whispered it, felt as though Lord Stark himself guarded the keep. In the silence after, Arya retrieved needle, pressing its cold kiss to her brow. She took it not as a single daughter but as steward of a fortress of souls. Winter tightened. The last maize barrel emptied before the 8th moon of snow. She consulted Lewin's records and discovered a forgotten store of smoked eel in a cellar sealed decades earlier. Grooms unearthed it through frost-caked doors. There was enough protein to stretch lentils for another moon. Starvation retreated once more. Spring would come eventually, but before meltwater trickled down the gutters, ravens screamed again. Robb Stark had defeated Jaime Lannister in the Whispering Wood. Bannermen cheered. Pipe smoke curled like prayers. Yet victory south meant nothing if Winterfell, heart of the north, faltered. Arya turned every scrap of news into calculus. Which houses aligned? Which passes remained unguarded? She traced supply lines on parchment and wondered how she might send aid without draining their own stores. Roderick summoned her to council one bleak afternoon. Snow thumped against the shutters. He held a letter sealed in wax stamped with a kraken. "Balon Greyjoy plots," he said. "The Ironborn think us distracted. They raid our coasts already." Arya's fingers tightened around the chair. "Sea wolves snapping at our flanks. Robb asks us to increase watch on the western shore. How many ships can we muster from White Harbor? Too few this season with storms and thin crews." Arya stared into the crackling hearth. "Then we lure them inland where their boats avail them not." She unfurled a coastal map. "Here, the Barrow trails near Flint Cliffs. Narrow ravines. Could trap raiders between two ridges, archers above. Nessuterwan." Roderick studied the markings. "You'd need a commander who knows the hills. Kaelor was raised among them. You would send your best sparring partner alone." "Not alone. I will ride with him." Roderick frowned. "Winterfell cannot spare you. Winterfell cannot keep me if its lifeblood is stolen coastal village by village. A general must know the field beyond her walls." He sighed, aware she had surpassed the argument where youth could bar resolve. "Take 20 riders. Signal by skyfire if you need more." None. Preparations were swift, banners hidden to disguise numbers. Arya donned boiled leather patched at shoulder and thigh. Needle remained at her hip. Across her back, she slung a stout yew bow carved by Bran's hand. The night before departure, she knelt before the heart tree, requesting neither mercy nor conquest, only clarity. Dawn spilled like tarnished silver over the courtyard as her party set out. Wind nipped through her cloak, but the cold felt less an enemy than a pledge. "Remember the North's bite, and you will never waver." Hooves crunched over crusted snow, lantern light bobbing ahead. Days of hard ride stitched Winterfell to the ragged coast. They skirted villages already charred, nets strewn like entrails across frozen sand. Arya heard the distant roar of waves, like 1,000 armored men murmuring. She studied tide cycles, marking where longships might beach at dusk hush. Her riders dug traps camouflaged with driftwood and seaweed. On the fourth twilight, ironborn sails cut the horizon, black squares against bruised sky. Arya's blood hummed a cadence older than fear. Measure, anticipate, strike. She directed archers to crag shoulders where crosswinds would guide arrows truer. She placed collar and 3 spearmen near the ravine mouth to bait pursuit. The ambush unfurled like a fisherman's net, swift and silent. When ironborn warriors trudged up the stony pass, lured by Kalor's torch, and feigned stumble, volleys rained from above. Arrows split helm and hauberk alike. Panic pushed them forward into spiked pits disguised beneath kelp. The clamor ricocheted through the gorge, but the sea smothered cries beneath its own roar. Arya watched from a shelf of rock, every muscle alert, tracking shadows in flux. She loosed 3 arrows, one felling a raider raising signal horn, another crippling a swordsman who clambered toward her vantage, the third to end his pain. When the last ironborn broke, attempting retreat, she whistled twice. Riders burst from the tree line, hemming them against cliff's edge. No prisoners taken. Roderick had taught that mercy ill suits foes who relish salt wife and blighted hearth. As night regained its hush, her men gathered among the dead, flames licking spilled oil. Kalor approached, helm under arm. "We lost 2, he said, voice lowered. Arya drew a breath sharp with brine. They will sleep under cairns of northern stone. The Ironborn will whisper of broken shields at flint cliffs. They lit beacon fires along 3 peaks, a coded flare telling Winterfell the threat abated. From one summit, Arya gazed over the dark, frothing sea. Somewhere beyond lay faraway kings and queens, their wars webbed with gold and prophecy. But in this stark hour, the North had guardians unrecorded by minstrels. She felt the truth settle. The wall she built was not merely stone but people bound by vigilance. Return to Winterfell was swift but sober. Snow had melted in patches, unveiling muddy cobbles where green shoots braved sun. The yard bustled anew with fresh recruits bound south to join Robb. Yet their faces lit at sight of Arya trotting through the gate, Kaelor at her flank, Ironborn Kraken banners slashed and slung beneath their saddles. Roderick watched from the steps, pride flickering like dawn behind storm clouds. "A general sees beyond," he repeated when she dismounted, "and returns with vision sharper still." She offered him the captured banner. Winterfell's walls extend to the cliffs when hearts beat as one. He clasped her hand. "And someday, perhaps, the world will learn the name Winter's Blade." Arya felt the ring of House Castle warm beneath her glove, blood thudding steady. She pictured the countless leagues between this gate and the Riverlands, where Robb fought for justice. She would sharpen Winterfell into a spear pointed south, a bastion that could not be flanked, a fortress that fed its armies and its hope. She would train children in ways of courage, teach elders to trust in new sinew. And when the winds shifted course again, when horns blew across highlands carrying word of fresh menace, Arya Stark would answer not as the girl who once chased cats in sunlit corridors, but as the northern general the weirwood had foretold in silent dreams of red leaves fluttering against white bark. Unyielding, unseen, yet utterly present, like the heartbeat of winter itself. Her story was only just beginning its march, each step a note in a saga, long as the wall's shadow at dusk. And behind her, Winterfell breathed. Not a castle of stone and mortar, but a living creature stirred awake by a young wolf's unrelenting resolve. Cow Olun. Cow Anune. The courtyard fires burned low, throwing a thin veil of ember glow across the packed earth as Arya crossed to the granary. Horses blew clouds into the air, restless after the long ride back. Stable hands soothed them, braiding manes with ribbons, dyed the stark gray and white. She paused at the doorway to feel the new rhythm of Winterfell around her. The blacksmith's distant hammer, the deliberate scuff of sentries along the ramparts. And somewhere behind it all, the soft drip of Thauder finding its path through ancient stone. It had been only 9 nights since she left for the cliffs, yet already every sound seemed both familiar and faintly altered, as though the keep itself had shifted stance in her absence. Inside, she found Maester Luwin bent over casks of salted beans, counting by touch in the lantern light. He glanced up, spectacles glinting. "You returned sooner than my quills predicted," he whispered, voice roughened by dust. "We returned sharp and lighter by a few foes," Arya replied. She lifted a lid, inhaled the briny scent. "Stores hold? Enough to greet spring, if no new mouths arrive." His eyebrow rose. "Though ravens always find ways to bring additional mouths. Then let ravens come. We will feed them before they voice complaint." He chuckled dryly and pointed to a leather pouch on the shelf. "Letters for you. One carries the Lannister seal, broken. Another bears a sigil I have not seen. A sable bear on pale ice. Damn nay." She collected them, feeling wax crumble under her fingertips. The Lannister parchment proved brief and barbed, its text a crabbed hand promising generous reward for any Ironborn Reaver who delivered Arya Stark alive to Lannisport. The signature was Sir Adam Marbrand's. She read it twice, then fed it to the flame of Luwin's lantern. The wax hissed. The parchment curled. Only after the last curl had fallen to ash did she open the second missive. The unknown seal belonged to Lady Mage Mormont of Bear Island. Her words were blunt as a mace. She had driven off a Greyjoy longship from the northern shore and captured 6 men. She would send heads by boat as proof, she wrote. But a storm had claimed the trophies. Instead, she offered her sword, and the swords of 20 islanders trained to fight, in sleet, sea spray, or hell itself. All she required was transport across the bay. Arya felt her pulse quicken. 20 island women hardened as driftwood were worth thrice their number in untested conscripts. She closed her fist around the parchment. "Lady Mormont's claws seek Winterfell," she told the maester. "We will grant her landing and a place in the fight." Luwin's eyes warmed behind the lenses. "The North grows teeth of many shapes. So long as they bite the same enemy," Arya said, turning for the door. "Send a raven. The bear's daughters are welcome." The next morning broke on a sky the color of hammered lead. Snowmelt coursed through the yard and sank into mud around the training post, where she resumed drills with the youngest squires. Bran had devised a system for keeping time. A rope knotted with carved bones, each knot marking 50 strokes of the bell. When the rope emptied its bones to the ground, lessons shifted. The boys grumbled, learning to handle spear and shield, while calves sank ankle-deep in mire-fouled boots and tempers. Arya demonstrated by moving through the thick sludge without flinging a glob wider than a hound's ear. "Balance and intent," she told them. "A soldier had no ally in mud but patience. Fight the earth, and it swallowed you quicker." One lad, the miller's nephew Reich, wielded his spear as though swatting flies. "Keep tip high," she barked, nudging him with the shaft of needle. The moment blade dips, an enemy's shoulder slips beneath. He lifted, scowling. "I'm slippery as an eel. Eels end in nets." She pressed him back until heel met slop, forcing him to plant and pivot. His second lunge found purchase between her arm and side. A creditable strike. She tapped his helm in salute, then clapped louder for the others. They would need such grit soon. Each raven from the south carried rumors of battle swelling like summer storm clouds. Whispering Wood, the camps, Stone Mill. Robb's victories drew songs, but victories also bred new fronts. After drills, she joined Kalor atop the eastern battlement. From there, the King's Road stretched south, faint as a charcoal line under the half-melted snow. "Tracks," he said, pointing to ruts clawed into the slush at the base of the hill. "Cartwheels, heavy load, bound for the bridge. Caravan from Barrowton?" Arya guessed. "Or Bolton," Kalor muttered. His scar tugged white. "Flayed men ride easier when ice softens." She followed the tracks with her gaze until they vanished beneath the bare birches. "Double scouts along that stretch," she decided. "If it's Bolton, we greet them with eyes first." Kalor grunted agreement. Orders rarely needed flowering between them. He signaled 2 of his hill riders, wiry women disguised in dun cloaks, who slipped into the trees before breath could cloud twice. Arya rested forearms on cold stone and exhaled. The world below was thawing, but a strange stillness hovered, as if every twig and blade waited for something vast to crack. Lanterns flickered when Arya entered the solar to find Sir Roderick poring over fresh maps. He had lit a dozen candles, their glow revealing deepened grooves beside his nose, worry lines etched by nights too long, and tidings too grim. He looked up. "Sit," he said, sliding a pewter cup of watered wine across the table. "We have numbers to tame." She sat. Numbers had become a second sword in her hand. She knew how many arrows could be fletched from one winter-killed goose, how many bricks could be fired from a cord of spruce, how many hearts a simple victory could rally. Roderick pointed to clusters of wooden pegs, marking holds from White Harbor to Last Hearth. "Torrin Karstark sends word," he said. "His father dispatches 200 lances and 60 archers northward, to bolster Winterfell, until Robb returns." "Karstarks ride hard," Arya replied. "They'll need fodder. Enough oats for now. But their arrival means barracks space runs thin. I intend to quarter half in the old glass gardens. The roof still captures sun. Manamani." She sipped the wine, thinking, winter sprouts there too. They'll sleep warm. She traced a finger to the Dreadfort, a lone red peg among gray. Any reply from Roose Bolton? Roderick's mouth tightened. "None. Scouts report he gathers men at Moat Cailin, claiming to guard the neck. Yet ravens speak of his maester mixing more leech blood than ink." He jabbed the map. Dot. I would trust a snake before I count on the Boltons. Then we count them as potential foe until they prove friend, she said, pushing away the cup. Assume treachery and we lose nothing by watchfulness. Roderick's stern eyes softened for a moment. You speak like your father at council. Arya's throat constricted. She swallowed. Then I hope I listen as he did. Send word to Carhold. Tell them their men ride into trusted arms, but that we track every step. Roderick nodded, and wax dripped between them like slow tears. At dusk, she walked Bran through the latest patrol routes. They sat beside the rookery's terrace where ravens hopped along the iced parapet. Feathers puffed. Bran gripped the armrests of his newly forged chair. Wheels rimmed with iron hoops wide enough to roll across half-melted snow. Gendry made it stronger, he said, patting the spokes with pride. The smith's boy, once a quiet apprentice to Mikken, had earned unexpected repute for cunning with brass joints. Arya unfurled the parchment. See these marks? Each torch post now aligns to another within 60 paces. If one light fails, the next flares brighter in answer. A chain of fire. Medivh war. Bran traced the symbols. Like those beacons of Dragonstone old Nan tells about. Exactly. Though ours carry wolf fire, not dragon. He looked at her, eyes shining with untamed ocean. Do you ever wish for dragons? I wish for anything that keeps us safe, she admitted. But safety is mostly forged by hands, not born from legend. She pinched his knuckle gently. And sometimes wheels turn legends truer than wings. A gust lifted his hair, and for a heartbeat, she imagined Bran soaring over battlements, a crow's vantage, the world beneath tiny and knowable. She placed the parchment on his lap. You keep this copy. If torches die, your mind sees roots I miss. I will remember every flame. He promised, voice firm. She smiled and wheeled him back toward the lift. The ramp's boards creaked, torches guttered overhead. Yet in the hush, she felt Winterfell's heart beat stronger. One more pair of eyes. One more vow. 2 days later, the scouts returned. They brought word not of Boltons, but of a lone rider bearing the direwolf banner. A messenger from Robb. The youth's pony came lathered, legs cut by brush. Arya received him in the gatehouse, flanked by guards. He knelt, pressed fist to chest, and produced a scroll sealed with Robb's personal stamp. She broke it. The words were terse. Robb would cross the twins within a fortnight and pressed her to dispatch any spare provisions to Moat Cailin, whence they would move south with his host. War churned faster than food could follow. He asked also for news of Bran and Rickon, and for reassurance that Winterfell's defenses stood uncracked. At the end he wrote 3 lines. Remember, little sister, a sword has 2 edges. Strike one foe, guard against the second. Wolves run best in packs. Robb. She rolled the parchment and looked at the messenger. Your name? Harrion Smallwood, m'lady. Rest and feed your horse. You ride at dawn with my answer. He blinked at the formality, perhaps expecting warmth from a sibling of his king. Yet Arya's smile, when it came, was like the first break of sun through winter clouds. Narrow, bright, surprising. And thank you, Harrion. You ride well. He flushed bow red, and allowed the guards to escort him to the keep. That night, she wrote beneath candlelight until wax puddled over quill stubs. Her reply listed stores she could send. Dried turnip shavings, smoked fish, barley bread hard as shield board. She would ship them by sled as far as the neck, then by mule train south, guarded by 10 of her best bowyers under Collar's eye. She told Robb the wall torches burned brighter than ever, that Bran had wheels of brass and iron, and that the north whispered his name as though it were flint striking stone. She ended with a single sentence. Winter waits, but it never sleeps. She sealed it and carried it herself to the rookery. Snow dusted her shoulders as the raven took flight, wings beating the night with unerring purpose. She watched until darkness swallowed it whole. Morning, unveiled trouble. The cook's assistant sprinted across the yard, skirts flying, and grabbed Arya's sleeve while she sparred with guard Captain Kara. Someone's poisoned the kennels, she gasped. 7 hounds, stiff as boards. Arya's stomach nodded. She sheathed needle and followed at a run. Frost cracked beneath her boots. The sky hung heavy with unshed sleet. In the kennel yard, stable boys knelt over limp shapes. Eyes filmed white stared blindly, tongues lolled, foam-crusted jaws. Maester Lewin crouched nearby, pressing nostrils of a pup with a linen dabbed in vinegar. "Wolfsbane," he whispered. "And something else, bittersweet nightshade, maybe." Arya knelt. "Show me where they drank." A boy pointed to a trough half empty. The water shimmered oily, tinted faint green. She sniffed, a sickly sweet fragrance like crushed apple leaves. "How many hounds?" she asked. 13 drink here," the kennelmaster said, voice breaking. 7 dead. 4 sick. 2 yet stood clear. Mendensauer. Who has access? Anyone on feed duty. Rotates every watch. She rose. "Lock the yard. No one leaves until we speak." Roderick arrived moments later, beard bristling with cold. After surveying the scene, he ordered each handler searched, garments examined, pockets turned. Arya oversaw while torchlight flickered on anxious faces. She watched eyes, not hands. Guilt often hid in the twitch of a lid. One groom, a boy named Tad, shifted foot to foot when questioned. He stammered that he had tended the trough at dawn, but swore he found the water clean. Arya stepped close enough to see a fine tremor in his jaw. "Look at me," she said quietly. He lifted watery eyes. "Why shake? The wind is mild." His gaze darted across the yard. I worry for the beasts." She studied him, then slipped needle's point beneath his collar, urging chin up. "Animals, Davy, when humans choose," she murmured. Whose choice was this? Tears welled. He swallowed. "A man paid me," he whispered. All man with Bolton colors under his cloak. Needle pricked skin, a bead of blood surfaced. "Name." I never asked." Roderick seized the boy by the scruff. "Where is this man now?" "South Gate." Tad sobbed. "He said he'd signal with a lantern on the hidden road at dusk." Roderick barked orders. Guards sprinted for the walls. Arya kept needle steady until Tad fell silent. 7 hounds dead," she told him, voice company to the cold. "They sheltered Winterfell. Now you shelter crows." She turned away before Roderick's men dragged him off. They found no lantern and no Bolton agent along the south road that evening. But the message was clear. Someone probed Winterfell's defenses, seeking cracks not of stone but of loyalty. Arya convened the senior garrison at midnight. Torches lined the great hall. Low flames carved shadows of helmed men onto the pillars. "No secrecy remains," she said to the circle. "Bolton's sigil crawls in the dark. We scour every wagon, every barrel. Double guard at both gates. Rotate watchposts irregularly." Her gaze swept them. "If any doubt, bring it to me alive, not dead. We learn more from tongues than corpses." Murmurs of assent echoed. Yet fear slithered beneath. She felt it in the twitch of a gauntlet against hilt, in the way Kara's eyes flicked to the kennel door. Fear was enemy's oldest blade. She would blunt it by daylight. Before dawn, she and Kalor walked the walls, greeting each sentry by name, praising vigilance, questioning readiness. She made them speak their worries aloud. A sister sick with winter fever, a son eager to ride south, a father lost to the Bay of Seals. Each fear she acknowledged, then folded into resolve. "You watch Winterfell for them," she told each in turn. "Your eyes keep them safe. Hold fast, and your kin shall hold hearthfires for you in return." By sunrise the yard hummed steadier. Even so, Arya set hound patrols at Triple Rove once the maester confirmed the living dogs would survive. She walked among them, letting them sniff her palms, earning wagging tails despite grief. Wolves must grieve on the run, she reminded herself. Stop too long, and sorrow eats the sinew. 3 days later, horns blared at the east tower. A single ship with bare sails glided up the White Knife, oars flashing under weak sun. Lady Mage Mormont herself stood in the prow, clad in mail mottled with green-gray patina, sword strapped across her back. Behind her, 20 women disembarked, hauling crates banded with rope and washed salt. They marched through Winterfell's gate, like a breeze of sea rock, faces weather-tough. In the great hall, Maid shook sleet from rough curls and greeted Arya with a bear's clasp. "So, you are the wolf cub ordering grown men about," she rumbled. "I half expected a specter thrice your height, the way sailors tell it." Arya smiled. "I'm as tall as I need be." Mage roared laughter. "A North woman measures by bite, not inches." Mai's feast welcomed them that night. Modest fare of oat bread, turnip stew, salted boar, but the mead poured strong. Mormont women traded battle tales with Karstark scouts, newly arrived. At the dais, Arya sat between Roderick and Maeg, absorbing every scrap of coastal strategy the elders shared. "We swim from skerry to skerry in full mail," the bear lady boasted. "Ironborn never believe until our axes find them under the waves." Arya leaned forward. "Could such swimmers slip upriver beyond Moat Cailin?" Maeg's eyes gleamed. "With enough wine to warm blood first?" "Aye, lass. 2 nights' stroke could see a dozen fighters behind any host." Arya envisioned Blackwater swirl, silent blades carving an opening far from expected fronts. She filed the tool away, another edge for the pack. When the hall quieted, she led Mage to the roof walk overlooking the godswood. A haze of fragrant smoke rose from the heart tree's chimney. Watchers burnt pine resin to mask the scent of dog death. Stars pierced the dark, reflecting off the weirwood pool. "Tell me true," Maeg said. "How long can you guard this keep when lions and krakens gnaw the same bones?" "As long as Winterfell needs," Arya answered. "Every new foe teaches me the shape of the next. I will not yield the gate." Maeg considered her, then unslung the sword and offered it hilt first. The pommel bore a carved bear head snarling, ruby chips for eyes. "This is Stoneclaw," she said. "Swam ashore with my grandam when wildling raiders burned our village. She used it until her arms failed. Now it seeks new fury. Keep it until bones slow." Arya accepted, tracing the ridged blade. "I have needle," she said softly. "Needle is a fang," Mage countered. "This is the paw to follow the bite." She slapped Arya's shoulder near buckling her knees. "But do not mistake. Fury alone wins nothing. To wear that steel is to carry the island's oath, defend the North from sea to storm. Live it, and the North's heartbeat will drum in your chest." They stood in silence, while wind moaned among crenellations. Arya felt the weight of Stoneclaw settle across her back. It was heavier than needle, heavier than Castle's iron ring. Yet with that heft came grounded force, as though Bear Island itself had gifted her a sliver of its bedrock. When spring's first true thaw cracked the last pond ice, a raven arrived from Deepwood Motte. Ironborn and under Captain Dagmar Cleftjaw prowled the stony shore again, raising fisher huts, seizing children as thralls. Arya called council. She spread Maeg's coastal charts on the map table, marking each raid. Kalar suggested ambush at the Crofters Brook Ford. Maeg argued for a feigned retreat, then flanking through the Alder Marsh. Roderick reminded them of the provisions convoy due south tomorrow, too vital to strip escorts. Arya listened, fingers drumming Stoneclaw's hilt. She saw lines of movement like threads warping on a loom. Convoy east, Ironborn west, Bolton secrecy centered. "Weave them wrong and the cloth ripped. We divide strength, we fail," she pronounced. "Ironborn expect us to chase every raid. Instead, we drive them not with swords, but with emptiness." Kara frowned. "How, lady?" "Strip the shore of targets. Evacuate fisherfolk inland before the Krakens land again. Hide their boats, burn what cannot row. Leave only traps and silence. Then tui. Want they sail farther, strike deeper?" Kalor asked. "Let them." She tapped the map. "We will lure them upstream past the Alder Marsh to Crofters Brook. Their Stoneclaw's women and my hill riders wait, bows on either bank. Ironborn rely on longships. They will not expect mud and brambles choking narrower water." May grinned all teeth. "I swim that brook blindfolded. Give me nightfall and a blade, and you'll wake to Crofter mud red with Kraken blood." Roderick stroked whiskers, calculation sparking. "What of the convoy?" Arya slid her fingers south along the King's Road. It departs at dawn with double escort. Once fisherfolk retreat, Kaelor's fastest riders rush west to join the ambush. We lose no time on supply. The room settled into nods. She saw trust kindle, tentative but growing. Preparation tore through Winterfell like summer storm. Fires lit on every outskirt held fast, signaling evacuation. Mormont swimmers ferried small folk across the inlets under moonless sky. Children clutched dolls, old men clutched nets, but none cried. They recognized the quiet purpose in Arya's stride and mirrored it. Within 2 days, coastline settlements lay empty, windows barred with driftwood, hearths dark. Ironborn longships appeared on the third dawn, sailbellies taut with a brisk northeast wind. From the ridge above Crofter's Brook, Arya watched through a spyglass as the reavers marched inland, following smoke plumes placed deliberately by Kaelor's scouts. Dagmar Cleftjaw himself led, jaw ravaged by an old axe wound, grin twisted. He swung a serrated greatsword the length of a child's coffin, hacking at brush. Behind him trudged 50 men, armored in patchwork mail, some hoisting cages for captives they would never find. On either bank, Mormont archers crouched behind alder trunks, arrows notched. Kaelora's riders waited farther west, horses tethered, spears ready. Arya knelt beside Mage in the marsh grass. The Bear Lady's eyes glittered hungry, but she held discipline. The trap depended on patience. Let the river do half the killing. When the Ironborn reached mid-brook, water surged thigh-deep, cold as snowmelt. Mud swallowed boots. Dagmar cursed, waving forward. That movement signaled Arya. She lifted Stoneclaw skyward. The blade caught pale sun and flashed. Arrows hissed. First volley struck, iron-tipped shafts punching through chain links, driving reavers to knees. Maeg swimmers burst from beneath the surface like seals, knives slitting hamstrings, dragging foes under. Panic fragmented the line. Kaelor's riders thundered in. Lances angled. Mud sprayed. Horses reared at iron's scent but pressed on. Arya advanced down the bank, needle in hand, Stoneclaw left across back. She cut one staggering raider across neck, pivoted, drove point into another's eye. Her mind quieted into pure motion. Breath, blade, step, dot, jaw. She saw the field not as chaos but as chessboard. Here a bishop felled, there a rook trapped between pawns. Dagmar rallied 3 men, forging toward high ground. Arya intercepted, sliding in mud to flank. Stoneclaw came off her shoulder in a 2-handed arc. The bare sword met Dagmar's greatsword with a clang like cracked skull. Vibration numbed her wrists, but she flexed fingers and swung again, pushing him downhill. Water lapped waist high. His footing failed. Mage roared behind, plunging dagger into a reaver's spine. Dagmar snarled, swung wide, but Stoneclaw slid under his guard, splitting mail at hip. Blood gushed black-red. He dropped to a knee. Arya leveled needle at his throat. "Yield," she demanded. He spat water and bile. "A kraken yields only to the deep. Then swim to it." She thrust. The point pierced gullet. Breath fled him in red foam. He toppled, swallowed by the brook that bore his doom. The battle ended in heartbeats, but Arya spent long minutes ensuring each kraken banner lay trampled. Mormont swimmers retrieved what weapons they could salvage. Kaelor's riders gathered spoils. They stacked enemy steel into cairns, set torches, and watched smoke curl into the sky like burnt tentacles. No Ironborn escaped to tell how a wolf and a bear and a mountain clan turned mud into jaws. That night, campfires ringed by alder logs welcomed fisherfolk returning to unburned homes. Arya walked among them, checking for wounds, promising carpenters to rebuild broken doors. A girl no older than 6 tugged her sleeve and held out a chipped shell necklace. "For the lady who scared away the sea devils," she lisped. Arya knelt, accepted, and tied it around her wrist beside the castle ring, heart thudding oddly soft. Summer banners blossomed, whilst snow yet lingered in shadows. Word of the ambush rode swifter than the iron smell of victory. Ravens from Robb soared with congratulation and caution. One triumph breeds pride, and pride invites misstep. Still, his envy was plain. He wished for Arya's eyes, across all his fronts. She answered, thanking him, but reminded Robb that Winterfell remained the lung of the northern host. It must keep breathing, else limbs falter. In quiet hours she began instructing Rickon, stubborn and fierce, in fundamentals of command. He practiced issuing clear orders to kennel boys, drilling them in relay messages across the yard. It became a game he relished. Bark, sprint, repeat. Each success dulled his grief a little. Bran meanwhile mapped beyond the walls, sending tame ravens fitted with charcoal pads to scrawl looping sweeps upon linen stretched in the yard. The marks created a crude aerial survey of surrounding leagues, revealing copses, streams, and rock faces unseen from towers. A general's new eyes. One dawn Lewin burst into the hall with parchment trembling. "King's Landing in chaos," he cried. "Renly Baratheon dead, Stannis defeated upon the Blackwater by wildfire. The boy King Joffrey stands yet." Murmurs rippled, but Arya studied the raven's seal broken, stark wax, not southern. "Who sends?" she asked. "Ser Edmure from River Run. He begs Robb return west. Tywin Lannister marches north from Harrenhal with fresh Tyrell allies." "Nothing?" Roderick cursed. Robb's flank exposed. Arya traced the river lines on wall map. "If Lannister bends east, he could strike the neck before Robb can wheel." "That would cleave us from the south," Cara muttered. Arya turned, mind already shaping lead to bone. "We must prepare a siege beyond any we have faced. Lannister gold outweighs Bolton's slyness." Roderick eyed her solemnly. "What do you need?" "Time," she said, "and every hand who can lift a stone." She began by ordering stockpiles of pitch brewed in the glass gardens, towering clay vats bubbling day and night. Smiths forged caltrops the size of a child's fist, scattering them at hidden avenues outside the walls. Masons reinforced arrow slits with iron shutters. Carpenters built barricades behind each gate, so if outer doors fell, inner teeth closed. Wells inside the keep were cleaned, deepened, and ringed with spare buckets. Every roof received layered sod to smother flaming arrows. She recruited women to weave thick ropes of horsehair soaked in brine, to swing blazing at ladders. Children gathered stones of sling size into nets hung beneath the battlements. Each new measure she wrote in chalk upon the great hall floor, until the flagstones vanished under diagrams of death and defense. When folk trod across them, they carried pieces of her plan on the soles of their boots, as though the castle's bones learned tactics by osmosis. Meg Mormont proposed raiding Lannister supply trains as they crossed the neck. Arya sanctioned 3 sorties, each led by a Mormont swimmer, paired with a hill rider. They stole horses, burned tents, shattered casks of hardtack until Tywin's men marched hungry. Yet she cautioned them not to risk capture. News of Winterfell's hand in these raids must remain rumor, never proof. Meanwhile, she confronted the question of Roose Bolton. No raven yet arrived. Scouts saw his banners at the Twins, conversing with Walder Frey beneath white field tents. The thought of Bolton parleying with Freys chilled Arya more than any late frost. She called Bran to the solar and laid the map before him. "Tell me what you see," she urged. Bran stared, fingers hovering over the neck. "If Freys lock the bridge and Bolton's hold the south bank, Robb cannot return without paying passage. And wolves seldom pay coin," she murmured. He met her gaze. "You think Bolton will betray?" "I think we cannot rely on men who wear flayed skin as pride." Bran nodded once, grave beyond his years. "Then we prepare for the worst, and hope for the river to drown traitors." Baronnier. As summer's heart ripened the air with pine resin and moss, Arya found rare moments of respite at the Godswood pool. She sat cross-legged by the water's edge, Stoneclaw laid across lap, breathing the scent of red leaves. Night insects chirred, a frog plopped. Within the reflection, she saw not her own face, but a shifting composite. Child chasing cats, novice fencer beneath dead skin mask, muddy warrior in a brook, architect of wolves. She wondered briefly which visage father might recognize first if he crossed that mirror. Perhaps he would only see duty. Footsteps approached. Roderick cleared his throat, but did not speak until she gestured him closer. "The convoy reached Moat Cailin," he said, sitting with a grunt. "Robb's men send blessing, and a message. He handed her a scrap of parchment borne by returning rider. She read under moonlight. I have won at Stone Mill, but lost at home. The Westerlings bind me to honor. Hold the north with tenfold caution, for father's blood is paid in thin threads here. Rob. Roderick sighed. Marriage politics. Threads unravel, Arya said quietly. She folded the note, tucking into her boot. If Rob's host weakens, Tywin will strike sooner. We must finish preparations in weeks, not moons. Roderick looked at her. You drive them hard, child. Stone drives harder. She laid a hand on heart-tree roots. And winter, even harder than stone. He considered the pale face carved into bark, mouth twisted in eternal knowing. You remind me of that visage, he said. Eyes carved deep enough to drink secrets. She managed a thin smile. Then may its secrets favor us. The day the Karstark contingent arrived, thunder greeted them like drums. Gray stallions slogged through mud, pennants snapping, armor dull. Torrhen Karstark, beard braided with iron rings, dismounted in the yard, and bowed to Arya. First stiff, then warmer when she addressed him by name and news of his cousin Clay. You have grown, he remarked, measuring her with soldier's eye. So have you, she replied, though mostly sideways with steel. He barked laughter. She led him to quarters in the glass gardens, where vines curled against thick crystal panes, diffusing light green. His men seemed pleased by humidity, after the clawing rain. That night at council she walked Torrhen through defenses. He questioned the triple gate reinforcement. Why not pour men on the field instead? But conceded when she explained pitch funnels and overlapping arrow sectors. He offered his lances to train with Kohler's hill riders, crossing cultures over ale. By evening each man wore a token of the other's stripe. Hill folk sporting sunburst pins, Karstark knights braiding talisman bones into reins. Camaraderie built layered walls stronger than timber. Arya understood that now. Every alliance within Winterfell, however small, became another stone bridging cracks. She slept that night back in her childhood chamber for the first time in moons, trusting her web of guards, traps and hearts to hold until dawn. Dreams roiled. She saw a white direwolf standing over a field of ash, howling wordless grief. She saw crows rising from burning towers. She woke before dawn, sweat chilling down spine. Outside, the first horn of morning moaned low. She rose. Wolves did not linger in nightmare. They hunted daylight. Fortnight shy of midsummer Tyrion Lannister's gold cloaks, reached the outskirts of salt pans, raising warehouses of grain that might feed Rob's war hosts. Word arrived by rider trembling from exhaustion. Arya assembled a strike team within the hour. Mormont archers, Karstark lances, hill riders, and 5 glass-garden crossbowmen, untested but eager. She would lead. Roderick objected, yet no one else knew the newest river maps carved by Bran's Raven surveys. She argued risk against necessity. In the end he relented, his sigh carrying a father's dread. They rode east under a red dawn, river mist rolling like dragon breath across horse legs. Arya felt Stoneclaw's grip print into palm through glove, its weight part of arm now. Her mind tallied every mile, one fewer between Winterfell and Need. It took 3 days to reach the wooded ridge overlooking salt pans. Smoke columns rose where Lannister men looted storehouses. She counted 50 soldiers, a dozen servants wrangling carts, 3 knights shining under gilded helms. No small raid then, a formal requisition by Lion authority. Arya chose nightfall. They crawled close under cloak of pine. Karstark lances circled west to sever retreat. Mormonts strung bows along dock pilings, aiming at lamplit path. Arya, Kellor, and 2 hill women slipped among stacked barrels to find the grain. They discovered sacks, already loaded on wagons bound south. Her gut clenched. Food meant for hungry riverland mouths, now to feed those who wielded wildfire. At her signal Meg's swimmers, this time wading mud instead of sea, set lanterns ablaze, then hurled them onto the river's oily surface where supply barges bobbed. Fire skipped across water like angry sprites. Lannisters cried alarm. Arrows slashed the air, crossbow strings twanged. Knights scrambled for mounts already spooked. Arya vaulted a cart, slicing axles with stone claw. Rye spilled in shimmering heaps. She darted beneath the flying hooves of a gelding, stabbed up into belly with needle. Horse shrieked, tumbled, rider pinned. A lion knight swung at her. She parried off his wrist, felt bones snap. He fell onto the grain he meant to steal. Battle churned, butchery ended swift. Kalor beheaded one knight clean. Crossbow bolts felled servants running for the dock. When the last golden cloak surrendered, Arya ordered them stripped and bound but alive. They might earn coin to rebuild what they burned. They spent dawn salvaging grain, too much drenched in blood or river water. Yet Bran's maps led Arya to an abandoned mill upstream, its stone floor high above floodline. She directed stores there, leaving Karstark guards. Robb's host would find bread when they marched this route north. On return ride she watched lightning dance across a distant horizon. Summer storms marched like armies, each cloud a siege tower. She wondered which would strike first, Tywin's legions, Bolton's treachery, or some storm of fate no map could capture. The day she reached Winterfell again, Rickon ran to meet her at the gate, Shaggy Shagadog bounding ahead. "Grey Wind," he shouted, confusing names in excitement. She swung down, hugged him hard. He thrust a small wooden wolf into her palm. "For luck next time," he said, cheek smudged. She tucked it into belt. Luck is lighter than steel but weighs just as strong. Inside, Roderick met her with grave face. "Raven from the twins," he said, handing scroll. "The wax bore not Stark or Bolton, but the twin towers." She pried it open. Walder Frey's spidery script sprawled across. "Your brother feasts beneath our roof soon to mend old slights. Bring wine if you wish to toast from afar. Lord Walder." Nothing in the words sounded amiss, yet every space between buzzed with threat. Arya crumpled the parchment. "Frey offers bones disguised as bread," she hissed. Roderick rubbed beard. "We can warn Robb, but ravens may not reach in time." "We ride," she said instantly. Then paused. Winterfell's walls loomed behind. Unfinished trump cards, children, Bran, Rickon, Carhold men just settled. To leave now risked the whole. To stay risked Robb's life. She felt the trap jaws close on her mind. Roderick read her turmoil. A general chooses ground. Sometimes that ground is not bloodkin but stone that shelters them. She met his eyes, pain, raw. If Robb falls, Winterfell may stand. But the north breaks. He laid a hardened hand on her shoulder. "Robb rides with Grey Wind and thousands of blades. You guard the heart. Hearts can summon new limbs. Limbs seldom grow new hearts." Nah. Tears brimmed, but she blinked them clear. "Then we pray," she whispered, "and we forge the gates so strong that even grief cannot breach." She sent 3 ravens anyway, each along different wind patterns, carrying the simple warning, "Beware Frey song. Wolves drown poor hosts." She watched them vanish, black flecks in vast sky. That night she climbed to the highest tower, Stoneclaw's tip resting against parapet, and stared south until stars blurred. Somewhere beyond those horizons banquet tables were laid, violins tuned. She imagined Robb smiling, toasting alliances, unaware of crossbows loading behind cloth. She clutched Bear Island steel and swore silently. If music turned to massacre, if red grapes hid blood, she would turn Winterfell into a storm so fierce that every treacherous house from neck to reach would tremble at a single name. Arya Stark, Winter's blade. She descended at dawn to resume the labors. Stone hauled, pitch stirred, children trained. The castle breathed, heart inexhaustible. And somewhere, on roads winding through shadowed passes, destiny advanced, slow but inescapable, testing whether a young wolf's resolve could outpace the tide of history. When dawn broke over Winterfell, painting the world in pale gold and rose, Arya was already awake and on the battlements, a silent watcher amid shifting winds. The night had yielded little sleep. Her mind had conjured scenes of feasts and slaughter, of ravens torn apart by hail or caught by hawks, before their warnings reached Robb's hand. Her fingers tapped the cold stone in an unconscious rhythm, as if she could send a pulse southward through the very bones of the land. Below her, the yard churned with new purpose. After months of drilling, training, and hammering at the defenses, every corner of the castle bustled with an urgency that could only be called resolve. Masons perched like crows on scaffolds, laying the last heavy stones above the main gate, while children scurried with baskets of lime and sand. Karstark lances formed two lines for a mock charge under Collar's sharp eye. Mormont archers strung their bows and loosed shafts into straw targets until the fletching split. The whole keep moved as a single body now, nerves braced, sinews drawn, each person a muscle in the great beast that was Winterfell. Arya surveyed it all and measured what she saw against her own standards. She marked the places where the wall showed faint cracks in the mortar, where shadows pooled beneath the eaves and might conceal a spy or saboteur, where the youngest runners still flagged and needed sharper words to drive them. It was a habit now, as natural as drawing breath. Roderick often told her that command was a matter of seeing, not just looking, and of never growing blind to comfort. Comfort, she had learned, was a foe in its own right, a subtle poison that crept into the joints of a fortress and made it brittle when real storms struck. Her morning rounds took her to the kitchens, where women baked dense loaves from the last of the autumn barley, and men hacked salted goat into ragged slabs. The stores were lean, but the discipline she had instilled had carried them through the hungry months better than any expected. "You'll be a hard mistress if you ever rule a hall, Arya Stark," Cook Sarah said, not unkindly, when Arya inspected the bins of onions and counted casks of ale. "But none will starve, and none will call you soft." "I'd rather they call me ready," Arya replied. "Soft is for pillows, not rulers." She watched as the cook ladled broth into a row of wooden bowls and handed the first to Rickon, who stood by with Shaggy Dog at his heels, solemn as any little lord. Rickon's hair had grown unruly, and there was a wildness in his eyes that hadn't been there before the winter, or before their father's death. But he obeyed Arya's every word, and the small folk had begun to look to him too, as a sign that the line of Starks remained unbroken. Bran was there as well, directing a pair of scullery boys who carried planks to shore up the door to the old tower. He greeted Arya with a wan smile. "The east wall's holding for now," he said. "But the cracks widen with each freeze and thaw. Maester Lewin says we should patch it with pitch and stone, but I'd rather reinforce it with timber like the old ways." Arya listened, weighing the advice. "We'll do both," she decided. "Pitch first, to keep the weather out. Timber second, to hold against battering rams or fire." Bran nodded, his pale face reflecting a gravity beyond his years. "I drew another map," he added, unrolling a sheaf of parchment and showing her a careful sketch of the outer walls, complete with every loophole and parapet. "If anyone tries to climb or break in, we'll see them. I've got the lookouts posting on a schedule, one every bell, never the same order twice." She ruffled his hair. "You'd make a better spy master than most lord." Bran grinned, some of the old mischief returning. "Maybe someday. For now I'm your eyes, Arya. I'll see for you even when you're sleeping." "Nun." That night, as the banners on the walls stirred in the icy breeze, Arya convened her council in the solar. The flickering candles threw long shadows on the stone floor, and the faces around her table were drawn but resolute. Roderick Castle presided with stoic dignity, his white whiskers glowing. Maid Mormont wore a patchwork mail shirt, her broad hands folded atop Stoneclaw, the bare-headed sword she'd given Arya in trust. Cara the Watcher, Kalor, the clan-born, Bran in his wheeled chair, and Maester Lewin, his chain glinting with knowledge, all gathered to weigh what news had come. Roderick began, voice low and even. "Reports from the south are muddled. Some say King Robb marches on the twins. Others claim the Lannisters ride north with a host twice the size of our own." Maid grunted. "If the Freys are feasting the young wolf, he should wear his armor at table." Arya passed around the last Raven letter, the warning from Walder Frey. "We've sent all the warnings we can," she said, "but it may be too late. Our duty is here now. If the Lannisters march or the Boltons turn traitor, we must hold until Robb returns, or until the last stone falls." "Now read." The map was rolled out again. Kalor pointed to the forests northwest of the castle. If an enemy comes from the Dread Fort, they'll try to circle wide, avoid the main road. Our hill riders can harass them, slow their approach, but we'll need scouts posted from the Weeping Water to the King's Road. Arya nodded. Pick your 10 best. Move them every dusk and dawn. Never let them sleep in the same place twice. If they see anything, a column of smoke, the glint of spearheads, even a single rider, they signal by lantern from the high trees. Dyname. Kara tapped the tower icons Bran had drawn. What if they slip past in fog or night? Arya traced a route with her finger. The fords on the white knife are swollen with meltwater. If anyone tries to cross, our archers will have the high ground, but double the night watch regardless. If an enemy appears within bowshot, fire the signal arrows. I'll not have Winterfell taken by surprise. Bran piped up, voice steady. And I'll have the bells ready. We'll wake the whole castle if need be. Dan sour. Lewin stroked his chin. Provisions are low but not dire. If we are besieged, we'll ration bread to half loaves, meat to quarter portions. The cellars hold enough wine and ale for a month. Maid shook her head. Mead runs out first in any siege. Give the last casks to your archers. They'll need steady hands and fierce hearts. Arya managed a thin smile. Archers first, agreed. I'll see it done. Roderick's gaze found hers across the table. Arya, if the worst comes, if the gates fall, or treachery strikes within, what then? She met his eyes. Then we fight from room to room, hall to hall, as the old kings did. Every stairway a fortress, every hearth a stand. Winterfell will not yield as long as one wolf remains breathing. There was a long silence, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Then, one by one, the council nodded. Even the youngest among them recognized what had changed. Arya was no longer a child, no longer the unruly girl who chafed at lessons. She was their general, their hope, the blade at Winterfell's heart. That night, when the hall had emptied and the wind howled lonely through the arrow slits, Arya walked the walls alone. She carried both needle and stoneclaw, the former for speed, the latter for the weight of legacy. In the silence, she thought of all that had been lost. Her father, her mother, the laughter of siblings around the table, the warmth of a home unthreatened by war. She let the pain settle in her bones, cold and hard, and shaped it into a weapon sharper than any steel. The following days passed in a blur of activity. The scouts reported no enemy hosts, only the tracks of a few Bolton riders and a handful of suspicious peddlers turned away at the gate. The weather turned unseasonably warm. Ice broke in the moat, and the first green shoots appeared in the gardens. Arya led her men in reinforcing the weakest wall with fresh timber and iron bracing. She oversaw drills in the yard, pressing even the cooks and stable boys into lines to practice slinging stones and wielding clubs. In the evenings, she walked with Bran along the parapets, watching for any sign of smoke or dust from the south. Rickon often trailed behind them, silent except for the occasional question about battle or the fate of their mother. Each night, Arya told him the same truth. We fight for home. We fight for each other. That's what Starks do. One afternoon, a pair of riders thundered through the gate. The lead horse was lathered with sweat, its sides heaving. Arya hurried to the yard as Roderick and Kara moved to intercept. The first rider, a grizzled man with a battered helm and a torn Karstark banner, slid from the saddle and knelt, gasping. Enemy comes from the south, m'lady, he panted. Hundreds, maybe thousands. Lannister colors and Bolton flayed men riding with them. For a moment, all sound seemed to drop away. Then Arya's voice, cold and sure. How far? 2 days, no more. They camp at the ruins of the old mill tonight, heavy with cavalry and siege engines. Roderick cursed softly. Mage bared her teeth. Arya took a slow breath. Rally the council, she ordered. Double the watches. Bar the gates. Let every soul in Winterfell know. The hour is upon us. The horn sounded before dusk, and the yard filled with defenders. Arya stood on the steps above the great hall, her face grave. The Lannisters and Boltons marched together, she called, voice ringing off the stone. They seek to take Winterfell, to break the north once and for all. But we are no easy prey. Every man, woman, and child here is a Stark at heart. Stand your ground, trust your neighbor, and fight with everything you have. The walls are strong. Our spirits are stronger." A ragged cheer went up. Arya stepped down among them, moving from line to line, gripping shoulders, trading quiet words, seeing the flicker of pride or fear in every eye. She gave Rickon a small, carved wolf, pressed into his palm. "Keep this close. If the fighting comes, you find Bran and stay in the tunnels beneath the hall until I come for you." Rickon nodded, eyes wide, clutching the talisman as if it might anchor him against the coming storm. All that night, preparations continued. Pitch was heated in iron kettles. Archers lined the walls, each with a sheaf of arrows and a flask of mead. Karstark lances held the main gate, spears braced, shields overlapping. The Mormonts and Hill Riders patrolled the perimeter, blades drawn, eyes searching every shadow. Arya did not sleep. She walked from parapet to parapet, encouraging the young, steadying the old. In the Godswood, she knelt before the heart tree and laid both needle and stone claw at its roots. "Let me be swift and sure," she whispered, "and let my courage hold when the day is darkest." The first sight of the enemy came at noon. Dust rose on the southern road, a long smear across the horizon. Lannister banners unfurled in the breeze, gold and crimson flashing, the lion rampant above all. Flayed men rode at their side, Bolton colors blending with the red of House Lannister, a bloody mockery of alliance. Ziga towers trundled behind, pulled by teams of oxen. The host was vast, easily 1,000 strong. Roderick joined Arya on the battlements, spyglass to his eye. "They march bold," he said. "Too bold for comfort." "They think us broken," Arya replied. "We'll teach them what it means to fight for the North." She ordered the gates sealed, the walls manned. The defenders moved into their places, every arrow slit and murder hole bristling. The Mormont women sang as they strung their bows, a low, throaty chant that shivered across the stone. Bran was stationed in the central tower with the bells at his command, ready to signal any breach. Rickon waited below, surrounded by 3 hand-picked guards. The enemy halted out of bowshot, setting up their camp with the casual confidence of conquerors. Arya watched them through the spyglass, knights dismounting, engineers assembling their towers, a few bold souls riding closer to survey the walls. She recognized the banners of House Bolton, House Frey, House Lannister. Somewhere in that mass, she thought, was the architect of this betrayal, Roose Bolton perhaps, or one of Tywin's sons. A rider advanced under a flag of truce. Arya ordered the gate, opened a hand's breadth, and walked out onto the drawbridge, Roderick and Mage at her side. The rider drew up, a Lannister knight, his armor gilded and his eyes cold. "In the name of King Joffrey Baratheon," he called, "I demand the surrender of Winterfell. Open your gates and lay down your arms, and Lord Tywin will spare your lives." Arya smiled, slow and sharp. "Winterfell does not yield. Not to Lannisters, not to Boltons, not to any southern king. Tell your master he'll find only death here." "Nemnder." The knight's lip curled. "You are a child playing at war. You have one night to reconsider. At dawn we come." She returned to the walls where her people waited. "They offer us mercy if we surrender," she told them. "I refused. Now we stand or fall together." No one argued. The council convened one last time that night, reviewing every plan, every route of escape, every fallback position. Arya assigned Color and Mage to the left and right flanks, Cara to the north gate. She gave Bran command of the runners who would carry messages from tower to tower. Lewin and the healers prepared bandages and potions in the cellars. At midnight, Arya walked the walls again. She found Bran waiting in the shadow of the tallest turret. "Do you ever wish for dragons now?" he asked softly. She shook her head. "I wish for wolves. We have them already. I'd rather trust what I know than pray for magic." Bran nodded, gazing out over the fields where enemy campfires glimmered like fallen stars. "Whatever happens, Arya, I'll see it. I'll remember." She hugged him fiercely. "Stay safe, little brother." Dawn broke cold and bright. The Lannister host advanced in columns, archers behind shield-bearers, siege towers grinding toward the walls. A deep horn blared from their lines, and Arya signaled the defense. Archers to the parapets, slingers to the murder holes, pitched to the towers. She stationed herself above the main gate, Roderick at her right, Mage at her left. The enemy loosed their first arrows, a black hail that clattered harmlessly off stone. Then the siege towers rumbled forward, their iron-shod wheels churning mud. Arya waited until they closed, then signaled. Pitch poured from above, fire arrows ignited the streams, and flames roared skyward. Lannister men screamed, tumbling from the burning towers, while the archers on the walls picked off those who tried to scale ladders. Bolton soldiers surged for the east wall, rams battering at the reinforced gates. Arya heard the timbers groan but did not waver. "Hold the line!" she shouted, and the Karstarks pressed in, bracing the gate with beams and shields. The battle raged for hours, a storm of noise and blood and smoke. Arrows flew, stones crashed down, and pitch boiled in the murder holes. Kaelor's hill riders sallied from a hidden postern, circling to strike the enemy's flanks before vanishing into the woods. Maeg's archers dropped men as they tried to breach the rear gate. Through it all, Arya moved like a shadow, shouting orders, lending her blade where the fight grew fierce, never faltering. At midday, a breach opened in the north wall. Bran's bell clanged, echoing across the keep. Arya raced to the gap, where Bolton men poured through. She fought at the head of the defenders, needle darting, Stoneclaw crushing shields. Rickon's guards formed a shield wall around the boy, driving back the first attackers. The Mormont women fought like furies, axes swinging, and the Karstark lances closed the breach with bodies if not with stone. Bolton's men were the worst. Silent, ruthless, faces masked by flayed skins. Arya met one in the breach, taller than she by a head, wielding a flensing knife. He lunged, but she ducked, stabbed him in the thigh, then rose with Stoneclaw in a savage arc. The blade sheared through leather and bone. The man collapsed, shrieking. More surged behind him, but Arya would not yield. "Hold, Winterfell!" she cried, her voice raw. The defenders rallied, pressing forward, driving the Boltons back with spear and blade. Elsewhere, the fighting was desperate. Kaelor fell wounded, an arrow in his shoulder, but would not quit the field. Maeg Mormont lost 3 of her women to a volley of Lannister arrows, but held the west tower, loosing shaft after shaft until her quiver emptied. Cara was everywhere, slitting throats and rallying broken lines. Bran's bells rang again and again, guiding Arya from breach to breach. By afternoon, the enemy's strength began to falter. The siege towers burned, their crews dead or fled. The north wall held, though half its stones were blood-slick. The main gate never fell, Karstark shields wedged against its beams. When Arya looked down, she saw the Lannister host had thinned, men deserting to the rear, wounded crawling from the killing field. Roose Bolton himself appeared beneath the south tower, banners flying, his men pressing for one last charge. Arya signaled Mage and the archers. 3 flights of arrows soared, and the Bolton lines broke in confusion. Roose wheeled his horse and fled, leaving the bodies of his men behind. The enemy retreated, harried by Kaelor's riders and Karstark spears. Winterfell stood battered but unbroken. Night fell. The moans of the wounded drifted through the courtyards. Arya moved among her people, praising the living, mourning the lost, tending wounds with Luwin's help. Rickon slept with Shaggydog in the vault beneath the great hall. Bran kept vigil in the tower, ringing the last bell until dawn. When the sun rose, Arya climbed to the highest parapet and looked out across the fields of the dead. Winterfell had held. The north had not broken. She felt the weight of it all, the blood, the grief, the hope that would not die. She stood in the wind, hair streaming, needle at her side and Stoneclaw on her back, and let herself feel proud. This was her home, her heart, her north. She would guard it, always, as a Stark, as a general, as the blade that never yielded. Not to Lannisters, not to Lannisters, not to anyone. Winterfell endured, and so would she, until the last snows melted and the wolves of the north sang of victory. Gencha. The frost of dawn bled away as the first pale rays of sun spilled over the carnage beyond Winterfell's walls. Arya's eyes followed the shadows stretching across the torn earth, the battered siege towers, and the bodies, enemy and friend intermingled, the field a grim patchwork of armor and lifeless limbs. For a long moment, she was still, the ache of exhaustion in every bone and bruise. She let herself stand, cold and alert, while the wind tugged her hair and fluttered the battered Stark banner above her. The silence after battle was sacred. A space for memory, for reckoning, for the promise that life still beat in the heart of the North. She turned from the parapet and descended the stairs, each step deliberate, her hands trailing along the wall as if drawing strength from the ancient stone. The main gate had held, but not without cost. Shattered shields lay heaped against the beams. Blood soaked the timbers, and men slumped where they'd fallen, too weary to stand, or simply unable to rise. Arya knelt beside a Karstark lance with blood crusted down his cheek, pressed a steadying hand to his brow, and murmured, "You did your house proud." He smiled, lips cracked, and whispered something about the old gods before he drifted away. Roderick limped past with a splint on his leg, his beard matted and gray with ash. "The dead need counting," he grunted, "and the wounded need more hands. There are bodies at every gate, every tower." "They burn the enemy dead," Arya replied, her voice rasped thin from shouting orders. "Theirs is not a place in our crypts. Our own will lay in the godswood until the ground thaws for proper burial." She rose, wiping blood and soot from her hands, and sent runners to every part of the keep with instructions. By mid-morning, the grim procession had begun. Maeg Mormont and her women carried the bodies of their own, singing the old bear songs of Bear Island, voices rough but resolute. Calor, pale but upright, directed the hill folk in building pyres at the edge of the battlefield. Children fetched armfuls of wild sage and juniper from the edges of the forest, and the scent of burning greenery mingled with the reek of charred flesh as the fires caught. Lewin and the healers went from pallet to pallet in the cellars, tending wounds, doling out willow bark tea, and sewing flesh with quiet efficiency. Arya moved among them, learning every face, giving a word or a touch, sometimes gentle, sometimes hard. There was no room for grief in her voice, but her eyes wept in private for each name she had memorized. Bran watched from the ramparts, his map rolled open in his lap, noting every change in the keep's boundaries, the new barricades, the broken towers, the scorched earth. Rickon clung to Shaggy Dog, both silent as stones, their presence a shadow among the living and the dead. Bran's runners, now practiced, ferried messages and water from the wells, with a discipline that would have astonished their mother. Arya watched them all and thought, these are not children any longer. The North makes wolves of us all. By the second day, the enemy's main force had retreated beyond sight, leaving only the dead and a handful of wounded prisoners who moaned in makeshift pens at the edge of the yard. Arya ordered them questioned. Most had little to offer. Foot soldiers driven by hunger or promise of gold. Southerners who stared with hollow eyes at the endless white and gray, muttering of cold and the madness of northern resistance. But one, a young Bolton man, with a split lip and a red handkerchief knotted at his throat, spat at her feet and sneered. "You can hold the walls a year, but the Boltons and Lannisters will come again. Roose Bolton's word is gold, and he will cut it from your heart if he has to." Arya studied him for a long moment, her voice a whisper edged in steel. "Bolton's word is mud and blood, and the North remembers." She handed him over to Roderick, who had no patience for southern defiance. As the days passed, Arya called council every dusk. Winterfell's leaders gathered in the battered great hall. Roderick, his limp pronounced but his mind sharper than ever. Maege, arm in a sling but eyes bright. Kalar, bandaged and thin yet unbroken. Kara and her watchers, Bran, his maps ever expanding. Lewin, who had lost none of his wisdom to age or grief. Arya presided at the head of the table, stone claw and needle laid side by side, her words measured and calm. "We cannot assume this victory is the end," she told them. "Bolton will not rest. Lannister gold can always buy more swords. We must rebuild stronger, faster. Every wall, every gate. And we must send word to the bannermen. Let them know Winterfell still stands, that the heart of the North still beats." "None." Mage rapped her knuckles on the table. "I can send riders to Deepwood Motte and Bear Island. The ravens will fly with the news. Let the krakens and the lions know the wolves are not so easily broken. Karstark men will ride to the Dreadfort's borders," Roderick said. "If the Boltons gather strength, we'll see them coming. Scouts in the woods too," Kaelor added. "We'll harry any army that tries to approach. Our riders can strike and vanish, keep them hungry, keep them cold." "Nisharnianden." Arya nodded. "Good. We rationed the grain. No feasts, just enough to keep everyone on their feet until spring." She turned to Lewin. "Send ravens to every house that still has men. Tell them what happened here. If Robb answers, we need to know. If he falls—" Her voice caught for only an instant. "If he falls, we hold Winterfell for as long as we can. For the North, for the old ways." The old men and women nodded, grave and determined. The council broke, and Arya lingered at the table, head bowed, listening to the echoes of voices that had gone. She pressed a palm to the wood, letting the memory of her father's hand at this same seat bolster her. Each day Winterfell was reborn. By Arya's orders, the children who could not fight carried stones and sand to patch the breaches in the wall. The smiths worked without rest, reforging shattered blades, straightening arrowheads, bending ruined armor back into service. The wounded helped where they could, sewing sacks, gathering firewood, scrubbing the blood from flagstones. Arya oversaw every task, lending her hands to the work as often as her voice. One evening, as she checked the defenses along the west rampart, Bran rolled up beside her, his eyes solemn in the twilight. "They say you killed 3 men yourself in the breach," he said quietly. "4. Arya replied, too tired for modesty. "But it wasn't just me. It was all of us. It was the walls, and the wind, and every Stark who ever lived here." Bran's gaze swept the horizon. "Do you think Robb will come back? Or Mother?" "I hope so," Arya said, though hope was a thin shield. "But if they don't, we keep going. We hold Winterfell until the world is remade, or we are gone." A silence fell, comfortable and deep. Bran traced a pattern in the frost on the rampart. "You're not just a general, Arya. You're the heart of the castle now, the way Father was." The words struck her, unexpected, sweet and bitter. She smiled at Bran, fierce and proud. "Then let's make sure it keeps beating, little brother. Let's make them remember who we are." As the days lengthened and the worst of winter faded, the world beyond the walls grew restless. Ravens brought news from every corner of the North. The Ironborn had raided as far east as the Rills, burning villages, but a counterattack from Bear Island drove them back. The Manderleys in White Harbor sent cautious congratulations and a promise to send food if the roads held. Even House Glover sent word, a terse missive. "The North is not lost. Hold fast." Not every letter carried hope. At last, one raven brought word from the Riverlands, a missive penned in Sansa's elegant hand, sealed with the direwolf of House Stark. "Dearest Arya, I have heard of your courage. I pray for you every day. The world is turning, and I do not know who will wear the crown when it ends. But I remember Winterfell. I remember you chasing cats, and the sound of your laughter in the halls. Keep the hearth burning for me. For all of us. Your sister, Sansa." Arya read the letter aloud to Bran and Rickon, her voice trembling but steady. For a long time, they sat together in the solar, letting the memory of home hold them close, as it had always done. Later, Arya tucked the letter inside her jerkin, a shield of sorts, and set out once more to make her rounds. Summer's first storms swept the fields, drenching the earth and pounding the battered walls with rain. But the crops grew. The wildflowers returned to the meadows, and the North's lifeblood, its people, slowly filled the battered villages. Refugees came from the burnt lands near the rills, from flint villages lost to reavers, from the edge of the haunted forest. Each new face was welcomed and set to work, felling trees for repairs, planting gardens, learning to use a bow or spear. With every passing week, Arya's reputation spread. The Wolf General, they called her, the girl who held Winterfell against a southern horde, who trained children as slingers and women as archers, who rode into battle with needle in one hand and the bare sword on her back. Story sprang up, that she could run as fast as a direwolf, that her eyes saw in darkness, that she could sense traitors by their scent alone. Arya encouraged the tales, for fear was a kind of armor. But in her heart she knew the truth. She was no more than any other Stark, only more determined not to break. She trained every morning with the Karstark lances, besting them one by one with needle speed and cunning. She led the youngest in sprints and games of strength, forging the next generation of defenders. She broke up quarrels, mediated disputes, judged thefts and fights with a firm hand. She became, bit by bit, the center of Winterfell's world. The Godswood became her sanctuary. There, in the green light beneath the red leaves, Arya knelt each night, speaking softly to the heart tree. She did not pray for peace, but for the wisdom to endure war, for the patience to see through treachery, for the clarity to know friend from foe. One night, as she rested against the trunk, Kalor peered from the shadows, a fresh scar along his brow. "Word from the hills," he said. "Bolton men ride the barrows. They've taken 2 holdfasts and are pressing west." Arya rose, voice calm. "How many?" 50, maybe 60, but only half are true soldiers. The rest, cutthroats and mercenaries." She nodded. "Assemble the hill riders. I want them shadowed every league. Harass their scouts, poison their wells, burn their camps if you must. Leave none alive who refuse to yield." "Me." Kalor grinned, fierce and wild. "It will be done, Wolf General." As he vanished into the night, Arya touched the face carved into the heart tree and murmured, "The North remembers." When the new threat came, it was not from the south but the east. On a cold, misty morning, a horn sounded from the distant watchtower. Arya was atop the gatehouse, checking the line of archers when the call reached her. She raced down the steps, gathering her commanders, Roderick, Meg, Kohler, Kara, ... "What is it?" Meg demanded, strapping her shield tighter. "A column on the King's Road," Kara reported, panting. "Banner unknown. Dozens of riders marching slow. Looks like prisoners at their center." Arya's heart thudded. How close? They'll reach the outer fields by sundown if they keep pace. Roderick frowned, stroking his beard. "A feint, or survivors. We'll know soon enough," Arya replied. "Double the guards on every postern. No one enters the gate unless I say so." Memo. As the day wore on, the column approached, a ragged line of men and women on foot, escorted by a half-dozen armored riders flying a white banner. Arya studied them from the battlements. The leader raised a hand, then a familiar voice called out, tired, cracked, but unmistakable. "Arya, open the gate. It's me. It's Robb." A wave of disbelief swept through the defenders. Arya's breath caught, her eyes blurred. But even as her heart leapt, her mind remained wary. She signaled the guards. "Wait. Hold. Dip. If it's truly Robb, he'll know the words we used as children when we raced in the crypts." From below, the figure lifted his head, a weary smile cracking through grime and stubble. "First to the tomb wins. Loser feeds the dire wolves." It was Robb. Older, battered, limping, but alive. Arya ordered the gate swung wide. The survivors staggered in, Riverland's men, Northmen. A few women, all hollow-eyed and thin. Robb embraced her, his arms strong as they'd ever been. "You saved Winterfell," he whispered. "You did what I couldn't." She shook her head, tears spilling freely for the first time in moons. "I held the walls, but the North held together because of you." He smiled, a shadow of the boy he'd been, and looked up at the battered walls, the soot-streaked banners, the faces that watched him with hope and awe. "You built something stronger than stone here, Arya." That night, Winterfell feasted, not in extravagance, but in joy. Fires blazed in every hearth. Bran and Rickon wept with happiness at Robb's side. Maeg Mormont sang battle songs until her throat gave out. Calor shared the tale of the siege and the retreat of Bolton and Lannister. Even Roderick, grizzled and gray, raised a cup in Arya's honor. After, Arya slipped away into the Godswood. The moon was bright through the branches. Robb followed, leaning heavily on a stick. "You're not the little sister who chased cats anymore," he said, settling beside her. "You're not the boy who raced me through the crypts," she answered, voice thick with memory. They sat together, silent, listening to the wind in the leaves. "Will there be peace, do you think?" Robb finally asked. Arya looked at the moon, at the heart tree, at the battered castle she had guarded and grown. "Peace is a season. We can plant its seeds, but we must guard the fields until the crop grows tall." Robb nodded. "Then we'll guard them together." Arya took his hand, and in the moonlight she felt the hope of a new beginning. A Winterfell reforged, a North unbroken, a family made whole again by trial and memory. The cold wind sang through the trees, but Arya did not shiver. She was home. She was strong. And whatever storms might come, she would meet them as she always had, blade in hand, heart unyielding, her eyes fixed on the future, and the name Stark ringing out like a promise through the halls of Winterfell. In the quiet after the feast, Arya walked the midnight halls of Winterfell, feeling the hush of old stone settle around her like a mantle. Her feet traced familiar paths, skirting pools of torchlight, echoing in the same corridors she'd raced as a child. Yet nothing felt small or childish now. Every shadow belonged to memory and struggle. Her hands trailed along the pitted walls, feeling their scars, tracing the story of Winterfell not in words, but in the roughness of battered stone. She did not sleep. Instead, she watched over the battered ramparts, listened to the winds sigh in the crenellations, and watched the clouds drift before a moon as pale as bone. The taste of loss was sharp in her mouth. The faces she'd never see again, the voices lost in that bloody storm. Yet hope persisted. Warmth kindled anew in the hall, laughter rising from the battered survivors, the pulse of a future beating where once there had only been dread. Robb slept in the old lord's chamber fitfully, his brow furrowed, but surrounded by the sense of safety he'd nearly forgotten. Bran dreamed on a pallet beneath the window, the caw of his trained ravens ever in his dreams. Rickon curled up beneath furs, with Shaggy Dog pressed tight against his side, one hand still clutching the little wooden wolf Arya had carved for him. In the Godswood the air was cold and sharp, smelling of wet earth and the faint bloody tang of iron. Arya knelt at the heart tree, head bowed, her hands clasped tight before her knees. She whispered her thanks to the old gods, to her father's shade, to the North itself for carrying her through every trial. "I am yours," she murmured to the red leaves, "and I will not falter." When she returned to the keep, dawn was only an idea, just the faintest touch of blue in the eastern sky. The kitchens were already stirring, Sarah bustling about, the clang of pot and ladle promising food for every mouth. Arya joined her, rolling dough, slicing smoked fish, teaching children how to count loaves and measure beans so not a scrap would be wasted. The routine felt grounding, each act of care a small defiance against the chaos that had so often threatened to swallow them. By the time the sun crested the trees, the yard was alive with purpose. Robb, stiff but stubborn, had already taken command of the battered survivors who'd arrived with him. His men, hungry and hollow-eyed, followed his every word. Arya watched from the archway as he paired the Riverlands archers with Karstark lancers, the battered remnants of Glover men with hillfolk riders. "We don't have enough for 2 armies," he told her, a wry grin lighting his face. "So we make one stronger than either." She saw pride in the way he moved among them. But more than that, she saw wisdom. The young wolf had learned humility in loss, and his voice carried the weight of bitter experience. Arya joined him at the drill yard as he watched Maeg Mormont put the youngest boys through their paces with spear and shield. The bear woman's laughter boomed across the flagstones. "Your sister's a harder taskmaster than any knight," she teased Robb, jerking her chin toward Arya. "Best you not challenge her, lad." Robb laughed, something freer in him now. She'll be my captain of guards before the year is out." Arya shook her head. "Winterfell doesn't need captains. It needs wolves. Ones who remember, and ones who build." He leaned close, voice low. "You did more than hold a castle. You made a home for a broken pack. I'm proud of you, little sister." Amen. She felt a rush of emotion she could not name. "And I'm proud of you, big brother. Now teach your men to aim straight and we'll all sleep sounder." So the days passed. Spring pressed at the window panes. Buds swelled on the weirwood, stubborn green emerging through the red. Arya threw herself into rebuilding, drafting plans for new walls, overseeing the carpenters who shored up the crumbling east tower, measuring the stalks of grain and dried beans. She gave out tasks with a clear voice, never allowing herself the comfort of idleness. Bran's maps grew ever more intricate. He sent his ravens farther afield, their black wings stitching the sky over rivers and ruined holdfasts, and lonely roads. Arya learned to read the world through his careful marks, where enemy raiders prowled, where the first wildflowers bloomed in hidden hollows. Rickon shadowed her steps, learning to knot bowstrings and light a fire in wet weather, his face growing leaner, his eyes sharper with each day. Roderick Castle healed slowly but never stopped working. He limped the yard at dawn and dusk, pausing to correct a stance or inspect a length of new-laid stone. "There's no shame in scars, girl," he told Arya one morning as he leaned on his cane. "But make sure your scars teach you, not harden you into stone." She understood. Each wound Winterfell bore became another layer, another lesson. She poured herself into training every child, every woman who could hold a bow or heft a pail. She organized games in the yard, mock skirmishes, races with burdens, contests of balance and speed, so that every soul within the walls felt the pleasure of victory and the bitterness of defeat, learning both were a part of life. News drifted in like the slow melt of ice. Some was welcome. Manderley wagons bearing salt fish and oats from White Harbor, Glover axes from the Wolf's Wood, small folk returning to their fields and gardens. Other tidings were harder. Word that the Ironborn still raided the coast, that the Dreadfort sent no response to Winterfell's call for peace, that the king in the south was dead and a new war brewed on the horizon. Arya refused to surrender to despair. Each morning she stood atop the gatehouse and watched the land unfurl, mist clinging to the trees, the world reborn in dew and sunlight. She saw hope in the way the new grass pushed up through mud, in the songs sung at dusk by children who had known too much of fear. "There will be more battles," she said to Robb as they paced the ramparts together. "But there will be peace too, even if it's only a breath between storms." He nodded, looking west. "We can shape that peace, Arya. We can build it here, stone by stone." "And when the next storm comes?" she asked. "We'll weather it," he said simply. Starks do." They spent many evenings in the Godswood, all of them. Arya, Robb, Bran, Rickon, sometimes even Mage or Collar or old Roderick. Arya would sit by the pool, watching the reflection of the heart tree ripple with the wind. They told stories, of old kings and lost sisters, of the first Deerwolf, of the children of the forest. The words were a balm, weaving a net of memory that anchored them all. Sometimes, Arya whispered her own tales, of battles in the snow, of courage found in a child's eyes, of the promise she'd made and kept, that Winterfell would endure. When trouble brewed on the horizon, it always came subtly. This time, it began with riders seen far on the King's Road, a trickle of travelers with stories of war to the south, and a Targaryen queen said to be gathering dragons across the sea. Arya listened to every rumor, parsing truth from invention. She sent her scouts farther, always on the lookout for Lannister banners, or the sigil of a flayed man. One day, a scout arrived with a desperate tale. Bolton riders harried the coast again, burning villages, taking children as hostages. Arya responded with the speed and precision that had become her trademark. She sent Keeler and his best to shadow the enemy, and Robb assembled a swift column of Karstark lances and Glover archers to ride in support. Arya herself led a detachment of Mormont women and the fiercest of the young wolf-bloods, children she'd trained in silence, in courage, in the art of vanishing into shadow. They rode at midnight, their passage silent beneath the waxing moon. The woods were alive with night birds, and the restless hush of wind in the branches. Arya rode at the front, Stoneclaw slung across her back, needle at her side. Heart pounding not with fear but with purpose. They found the Boltons camped in a hollow by a stream, drunken on stolen mead, careless in their victory. Arya gave the signal with a soft whistle, and her wolves fell upon them in silence. The night erupted in confusion. Arrows thudding from the darkness, knives slitting tent walls, hillfolk howling their wild joy. Arya herself slipped through the chaos, seeking the captain, a thick-set man in crimson mail. She found him at the stream, sword drawn, breath steaming and cold. He grinned when he saw her, a broken smile above a cruel beard. "Stark pup come to bite," he jeered. Arya answered him in steel, needle darting quick as a viper. He was strong, but she was faster, and after a brutal exchange he fell, blood soaking the stones. She knelt beside him. "The North remembers," she said, voice cold as the water, "and the wolves run at night." The fighting was brief and terrible, but not a single child was lost. They freed the captives, gathered the living, and burned the camp. By sunrise, the sky glowed red with promise, and Arya led her people home, the rescued clinging to her stirrup, the legend of the wolf general growing stronger still. They returned to Winterfell as heroes, greeted by cheers and grateful tears. Robb met her at the gate, clasping her hand. "I knew you would not fail," he said, and Arya felt again that fierce warmth in her chest. They buried their dead in the Godswood, sent ravens to every corner of the North. Winterfell still stands. The North still holds. With each victory, Arya's sense of purpose deepened. She trained her wolves harder, honing them for the trials still to come. She sat with the council every week, weighing the words of the old and the dreams of the young. She sent food to distant holdfasts, supplies to allies, always mindful that unity was their greatest strength. She wrote to Sansa in the south, sending her stories of their battles and their hopes, willing her sister to find courage in the tale of northern endurance. One day, news arrived that the Ironborn had been driven from the Rills, and that a new queen marched with dragons in the far south. Arya gathered her family in council, speaking plainly. "The world is changing, new powers rise, but we are still Starks, and this is still our home. Whatever comes, we meet it together." Robb nodded. Together. As the seasons turned, Arya watched the land recover. Fields greened, herds returned, laughter rang from the courtyards. She saw the young ones she'd trained become leaders in their own right, taking up arms to defend the only home they'd ever known. She saw Rickon grow into a wild, capable lord, and Bran's maps become legends in their own time. She saw the North remember every loss, every victory, every oath. And in the deepest hours of the night, as snow fell quietly outside her window, Arya would walk the walls and think of her father, of every lesson learned and every promise kept. She knew the world would not stay peaceful for long. Wars would return, and old wounds would bleed anew. But she also knew that she had become something more than a general, more than a warrior. She had become the spirit of Winterfell itself, unyielding, watchful, wise. And whatever storms might gather, she would meet them with sword in hand, heart unbroken, her pack at her side. For as long as wolves walked the woods, and the heart tree stood in the Godswood, the North would remember, and Arya Stark's name would be carried on every wind that swept across the land she had saved. K.An. Spring arrived on a tide of rain that swept the snows from the stones, filling Winterfell's moat, and flooding the old game trails beyond the walls with cold brown water. The sound of it was everywhere, drumming on slate, whispering through the budding branches of the Godswood, pooling in the hollows where Arya had once played as a girl. But the season's return brought more than green. It drew people, broken families, wounded riders, widows with bundles of all they possessed, streaming northward to the safety of the Stark seat. Arya made it her business to meet each new arrival. Every morning she stood beneath the gatehouse arch as men and women limped in, most with little to offer beyond a pledge in their hands. She asked their names, where they came from, what work they knew. She sorted carpenters to the rebuilding of the towers, seamstresses to mending banners and boots, strong-backed boys to the fields. Mothers with infants she sent to the great hall, where fires always burned, and where old Sarah and her helpers brewed vast cauldrons of soup. The maester's casks of healing herbs emptied quickly, but with Lewin's steady hands and Bran's guidance, the sick and broken found solace and order. For every 5 that arrived, 2 bore word of the south, of a riverlands in ashes, of the Lannister army shattered but not slain, of Tywin's death and Cersei's mad coronation, of a Targaryen queen's dragons laying waste to slavers across the sea. Some said King Robb's victories had made him a legend. Others whispered that the Freys and Boltons nipped at his heels, ready to betray him at the first falter. Arya listened to all, sorting truth from rumor, tucking every scrap of useful knowledge away. Each tale changed her, hardened her, made her sharper than steel. Less a girl, more the wolf general her people believed her to be. The work of rebuilding became a rhythm. At dawn, Arya led drills in the yard. The old spear dances her father's men had taught, now honed and refined by bitter necessity. By noon, she walked the battlements, testing new mortar, inspecting the placement of slits and murder holes. Bran rolled alongside her, never missing a flaw or a loose stone, offering ideas drawn from his endless maps and crow's eye view. By dusk, Arya was in the Godswood, hearing grievances, settling disputes, giving judgments as stern as any lord's. She grew skilled at weighing the needs of strangers and kin alike. She learned that justice was not just fairness but memory, a memory that could not forget what the North had suffered. Robb soon took his place at her side, no longer just her brother but her partner in rule. They worked together as one mind, seldom arguing, each trusting the other's instincts. Robb saw the big picture, alliances, battles, the shape of wars yet to come. Arya saw the detail, the hungry child, the resentful soldier, the creak in the gate that might spell disaster. Sometimes she caught her brother watching her with a mix of pride and concern, as if he recognized that the wolf general's burden might one day become too heavy to bear. The peace did not last long. Summer was late that year. The warmth lingered at the margins. But as the ice receded, the roads south became passable. Raiders tested the lands beyond the last river, striking at isolated villages, dragging away sheep and children. Arya scouts brought news of banners bearing the flayed man and the crossed towers. Roose Bolton and Walder Frey, it seemed, had not learned humility in defeat. Arya responded with swiftness that had become her signature. She dispatched Calor and the hill riders to track the movements of every bandit and turncoat. She placed Mormont archers on the borders of the Wolfswood, their longbows silent and sure. When a Frey raiding party was captured with a dozen captives, Arya rode out herself, Robb at her side, leading a force of 200, Stark, Karstark, Glover, and Hill clansmen, through the wet woods. They found the Freys drunk and careless, their camp strung along the banks of a swollen stream. Arya's force struck at dusk, arrows whistling from the tree line, spears and axes closing in before the enemy could rally. Arya herself slipped through the brush, needle in hand, seeking the leader. She found Lord Lothar Frey, silver-haired and fat, cowering behind a wagon. He saw her and tried to bluster. "I am a guest of the king in the north." But Arya heard the lie in his voice. She lowered needle to his throat and told him, "You are a thief and a murderer. You come to our land with steel, you leave it with nothing." She spared him, at Robb's urging, but sent him back to the twins, stripped and on foot, with a sign hung around his neck, "Winterfell endures. The North remembers." The other Frey she offered the choice, bend the knee and swear fealty to House Stark, or never be seen again. Most chose the knee. That night, Arya watched the freed captives huddled by the fire, women clutching children, old men staring in disbelief. She knelt beside them and pressed bread into their hands, promising that no one would harm them again. One little girl, no older than Rickon had been when their father died, pressed a flower into Arya's palm. "For the wolf lady," she said shyly. Arya tucked it into her belt beside Needle's hilt. After that, the land calmed for a time. But with every victory, new challenges arose. Food was scarce, the roads treacherous, tempers easily frayed. Arya faced down a would-be mutiny among the Karstarks, settling it with firm justice and open counsel. She judged a dispute between the Glover men and the Hillfolk over hunting rights, forging a compromise that left both sides grumbling but at peace. She settled a blood feud between two rival villages with words, not steel, a thing she found harder than any battle. Still, the North knit itself together, slow as the thaw. Bran's maps grew ever wider. His ravens flew as far as the Shadow Tower and the Dreadfort, returning with scraps of news from a world gone mad. Rickon, now a wild, laughing shadow with his great black wolf at his side, helped rebuild the old farmsteads, becoming a legend among the small folk. The Wolf Boy of Winterfell. Robb sent envoys to White Harbor and Deepwood Motte, forging a network of alliances that stretched from the hills to the sea. Arya watched it all, restless in victory, never trusting peace. She trained harder than ever, sparring with Mage Mormont in the yard, running the length of the walls in the dawn mist, teaching the youngest girls to shoot, to ride, to speak their minds. She wrote often to Sansa, her letters filled with news and longing and hope. It was Sansa's reply that brought the first whisper of new danger. A single line, written in careful slanting script. The Queen across the sea gathers ships. She has dragons. She remembers the North. Arya brought the letter to Robb, who read it in silence and then stared out across the battlements, as if searching the horizon for sails. "Do you fear her?" he asked quietly. Arya shook her head. "I fear nothing that remembers what it is to lose a home. If she comes as a conqueror, we meet her as we meet all others. If she comes as a guest, we offer bread and salt." Robb smiled, tired and grateful. "If she comes for blood, we give her winter." The seasons changed, and with them, the rhythm of life in Winterfell. The children Arya had trained became captains and watch leaders. The women archers grew into commanders. The hill folk and town folk forged new bonds in the forge and in the field. The godswood flourished, its leaves deep red, the heart tree a witness to every promise kept and every tear shed. One evening, as the sun bled into the west and the bells rang for the closing of the gates, Arya climbed to the highest tower. From there she could see all of Winterfell, smoke curling from the rebuilt smithy, banners flapping at every tower, children laughing in the courtyards. Far beyond, the fields lay green and gold, the rivers full, the forests vast and wild. Robb joined her, his face older but softer, his arm around her shoulders. "We have built something good, Arya. Whatever comes, this will stand." She leaned against him, feeling the truth of it. "It will stand, and when the world changes again, so will we. Wolves endure." A cry rose from the yard. A rider arriving, banners fluttering. Arya watched as a woman dismounted, red hair gleaming, her step quick and sure. "Sansa," Arya breathed, joy rising swift and fierce. The gate opened wide. Sansa strode through, eyes wide with wonder, and Arya ran down the steps to meet her. They embraced in the shadow of the gatehouse, laughter and tears mingling. "You're safe," Sansa whispered, stroking Arya's hair. "I am home," Arya answered. That night, the fires blazed in the great hall, and the sisters sat side by side, their hands clasped tight. They spoke of old dreams and new hopes, of the world remade, and the North unbroken. Sansa listened as Arya told of battles and hardship, of wolves and legends, of the promise that had carried her through every night. In the weeks that followed, Sansa took her place among the council, bringing wisdom and grace to the table. Winterfell became more than a fortress. It became a beacon. Small folk flocked to its banners. Lords sent envoys seeking alliance and justice. Arya found herself at the center of it all, guiding, shaping, never letting the fire go out. But she never forgot the lessons of war. She kept her blades sharp, her scouts vigilant. She trained each new child who arrived at the gates, telling them, "You are the North's future. Remember your name. Remember your pack." Now, the world beyond Winterfell still seethed with danger. A Targaryen queen gathered her forces to the south. The last Lannisters plotted in their ruined keep. The Ironborn eyed the coast with hunger. But the North stood ready, unbowed, Each new challenge met with the same unyielding spirit. As summer ripened, Arya sat often in the godswood, listening to the rustle of leaves, the songs of the river, the stories Bran told of far-off lands and distant kings. She felt peace at last, not the peace of idleness but of strength, of wounds healed and promises kept. One evening, as dusk crept over the land, and the last light caught the red leaves of the heart tree, Arya looked around her, at her family, at her people, at the castle she had fought to save. She knew more storms would come. She knew that change was the one thing that could never be stopped. But as she rose and walked the walls, needle at her hip and stoneclaw across her back, she knew this Winterfell would endure, for as long as there were wolves to guard it, for as long as one heart beat for home. And in the cold, clear air of a northern summer, Arya Stark's name rang out, not just as a general or a hero, but as the spirit of a land that remembered, that fought, and that loved beyond all reckoning. The air was sweet with new grass and the smoke of cook-fires curling from every courtyard. A summer dusk painted Winterfell in molten gold and lavender shadows, the peace seeming almost as deep as memory, almost as fragile. The halls hummed with life. Children chased each other with wooden swords and painted shields. Women sang while stitching banners, and the forges rang as if the very stones of the castle had found voice. The north was not healed, not wholly, but the ache had softened. It was an ache that made a people strong. Arya stood on the western battlements, gazing out toward the riverlands where the sky bled into distant hills. It was there, she knew, that her brother's fate had been nearly sealed. She traced the blue horizon with a finger, thinking of all that had been lost, all that had survived. At her side, Sansa leaned against the cold stone, her copper hair catching the fading sun. "You always find the highest places," Sansa teased, her tone gentle, though her eyes still carried a depth Arya hadn't seen in childhood. "Do you ever sleep, Arya?" "Not when the world is quiet," Arya replied, a smile touching her lips. "Too much to listen for, too much to remember." Sansa's gaze lingered on the gathering shadows, a sigh drifting from her. "Sometimes I dream of Father's voice echoing in these walls. I think he would be proud of you. Of us. Then one day." Arya nodded, swallowing a tightness in her throat. "I hope so. I like to think we've made something new here, something he never imagined, but would have loved." Their silence was companionable, broken only by the cries of distant swallows, the bell-like laughter of Rickon tumbling in the yard below. Sansa drew herself upright, her poise natural and regal. "Mother's blood runs strong in you. Father's too. You lead with heart and with blade. That's what the North needs." "Nianwal?" Arya shrugged, not sure how to answer, feeling both older than the hills and as young as she'd been when she first learned to run these walls. Her eyes wandered to the yard, where Robb drilled a new company of archers. City boys, small folk, wildlings come south with peace on their tongues and hope in their eyes. Robb's voice rang across the stones, firm and impatient, no hint of the anger that had once shadowed his brow. They had all grown, Arya thought. War had shaped them, but it was peace that tested them. The coming of Sansa had changed the rhythm of Winterfell. Her grace eased old rivalries, her ear for the fears of the small folk brought quiet to restless corners. She met with the healers and the seamstresses, the millers and the old wives, lending a word or a listening heart. At council, Sansa's questions were gentle but sharp, and more than once, Arya watched Glover and Mormont alike hesitate before answering her, as if Sansa's gaze could strip away pretense and pride. Arya relished this partnership. She was steel to Sansa's velvet. Where Arya pressed for readiness, Sansa spoke for patience. Where Arya built walls, Sansa opened doors. Each evening, they met to share what they had seen and heard, the day's burden softened by the bond of sisters remade. Robb, too, drew strength from his sisters. The wildness of the battlefield had burned out of him, replaced by a dogged calm. His wounds healed slower with each passing year, but his sense of justice only deepened. The men called him the Wolf King now, half in jest, half in awe. Arya teased him for it, but when the banners snapped in the wind, she felt the truth of the title. He was the heart of their people, as much as Arya was its blade, and Sansa its hope. The council chambers glowed with the warm light of late summer when Arya entered for the evening session. Bran sat at the table, his eyes distant but clear. New maps unfurled before him, lines drawn by his ravens, rumors from distant harbors, symbols of ships gathering far to the south. Maid Mormont leaned against the hearth, her daughter Lyra beside her, both in boiled leather, their hair wild and salt-streaked. Color spoke in low tones with a pair of hillfolk, bringing word of broken roads and hidden passes. Luwin, older and grayer than ever, shuffled scrolls and blinked sleep from his eyes. Rickon sprawled near the window, Shaggy Dog's muzzle in his lap, eyes bright with questions. Sansa presided with quiet confidence, her presence like cool water on a fever. Robb arrived last, limping but unbowed, and took his place at the head. Arya settled beside Sansa, unrolling her own scrolls. Accounts of food stores, tallies of spear points, notes from her patrol captains. Robb's gaze swept the room. "We're whole again," he said softly. "After all these years, I see Winterfell as it should be." Maege grinned, her teeth white and fierce. "It stands because its wolves stand together, because you three lead as one." Sansa dipped her head, smiling. "And yet the world moves. Bran?" Bran gestured to the map. "My ravens bring strange news. The Queen in the south has crossed the narrow sea. Dragon banners fly over Old Town and the Arbor. She's taken allies among the Reachmen. But her letters are polite. She sends a message of peace, not threat. For now." "Damned sure." Robb's mouth twisted. "How do you trust a queen with dragons?" Sansa answered, her voice thoughtful. "You trust her to be a queen, nothing less and nothing more. We show our strength and our courtesy. We prepare, but we do not provoke." Arya nodded, weighing each word. "We watch every road. We train every hand that can hold a blade. But we also send an envoy. Let her see that the North is neither her enemy nor her prey." May. There was much talk, weighing the risk of sending north a queen's peace, the pride of refusing one. In the end, it was decided. Arya would remain at Winterfell, Sansa would draft the letter, and Bran would send his most trusted raven south with the response. A token of hospitality would be prepared, a gift of northern silver, a cloak woven of wolf fur, a carved box of snowberries. All reminders of who the North was and would remain. As the weeks passed, life pressed in. The small folk returned to their fields, markets bustled, and the old harvest songs rang again at dusk. Arya took joy in walking among the people, watching new friendships form, old grudges fade. She trained with the spearwives and wildling girls, teaching them to ride and hunt, to fire a bow from horseback, and to fight in shield wall. She saw the old wounds of war healing, if slowly, women helping each other through childbirth, men teaching orphaned boys to shape plowshares and mend fences. One afternoon, as she sat with Rickon beneath the shade of the heart tree, the boy studied her, brow furrowed in thought. "Will you ever leave, Arya?" he asked suddenly. "You used to talk about sailing to the end of the world." Arya looked at him, surprised by the question. "I think I found what I was looking for, right here. I wanted to see the world, and I did. But now the world comes to Winterfell." Rickon grinned, fierce as any wolf. "If it ever needs chasing off, you'll be here with your sword." She mussed his hair, smiling. "Always Darcy." Bran wheeled himself beside them, carrying a new letter. "The Queen has answered. She says her dragons will never fly against the North, so long as the North remembers peace. She asks for news of our lands, and sends her own. Grain, southern wine, stories of her conquests." Arya read the words, thoughtful. "A queen's promises are written on water," she said, "but she knows courtesy. For now, that's enough." Summer grew full and heavy. Robb organized a great harvest festival, inviting bannermen from every house that had stood loyal. Karstark, Glover, Mormont, Reed, even some Umbers, their numbers thinned but spirits unbowed. The feast lasted 3 days, with games and stories, music and dance. Arya led a hunting party for wild boar. Sansa judged the best loaves and pies. Rickon and the children staged a mock battle in the yard. Bran shared tales learned from his ravens. of distant lands and ancient magics, and the old men listened with awe and some suspicion. On the last night, as the fires burned low and music drifted through the darkness, Arya sat beside Robb and Sansa on the castle steps. The stars wheeled overhead, and for the first time in years, Arya felt the North at peace. Not the peace of swords sheathed in fear, but the peace that comes of strength and hope hard won. Sansa rested her head on Arya's shoulder. "Do you remember when we were girls? Before the world changed?" Arya nodded. "I remember you teaching me songs, and me dragging you through mud. I remember Mother's laughter and Father's voice in the yard. I remember thinking nothing could ever break Winterfell." "No?" Robb's voice was soft, thoughtful. "And it didn't. Not truly, not so long as we remembered." Arya smiled, fierce and proud. "We remember. Always." Autumn came early. A sharp wind blew from the east, and the godswood burned red and gold. The harvest was plentiful, the stores rich, but the world beyond still bristled with danger. Arya kept her sword sharp, trained her wolves harder. She taught the young to read and write as well as to fight. She listened to the fears of her people and trusted their courage in turn. One night, a dream troubled her, a vision of winter without end, of the heart tree weeping blood, of direwolves howling at a moonless sky. She woke before dawn, heart thundering. She walked the ramparts, breathing the cold, letting the wind strip the fear from her. She knew that darkness would come again, in some form or another. But she knew, too, that she would meet it with open eyes and steady heart. She gathered the council and told them her dream, not as a warning, but as a vow. "No matter what winter brings, we will stand together. We will remember. We will not be broken." That was her. Robb clasped her arm. Sansa smiled with tears in her eyes. Bran spoke softly. "The roots of Winterfell run deep. So long as one wolf remembers, the rest will not be lost." And so, the days spun on, each one a gift and a test. Arya watched her people grow strong. She watched children she had taught take up arms in defense, and then lay them down to plow the fields and raise families of their own. She watched Sansa guide the North with wisdom and mercy. Robb led with honor. Bran record the world with eyes no one else possessed. Sometimes she would sit alone in the godswood, listening to the quiet. She would touch the rough bark of the heart tree, close her eyes, and feel the beat of Winterfell beneath her palms, the beat of her own heart, and the echo of all those who had come before. She would remember the cold, the loss, the blood. She would remember the fire, the hope, the laughter. And she would rise, every time, to meet the dawn. Blade in hand, love in her heart, her people at her back. For this was her home, her purpose, her story. The story of Arya Stark, the wolf general of Winterfell, who never ran, who never broke, who forged peace from ruin, and built a North that would endure so long as a single wolf remained to remember its name.